What if the seventh Hokage got a second chance at life? In the Black Clover world, look, Naruto with his memories intact in BC is just unfair. We're talking shadow clones that actually think, Rasengan powered by mana, and decades of tactical experience packed into a 15-year-old's body. But here's the twist: instead of steamrolling everyone, what if he had to earn his place? What if his biggest challenge wasn't mastering new powers, but learning to trust people again? This is the story of how a legendary ninja became the heart of the Black Bulls, formed an unbreakable bond with Asta and Yuno, and saved not just one world, but all of reality. Hit that like if you're ready for some interdimensional chaos, and let's see how the will of fire burns in the Clover Kingdom. The autumn leaves drifted past the window of the Hokage's office, each one catching the golden light before spiraling away into the evening air. Naruto Uzumaki watched them fall, his weathered hands folded peacefully on the desk that had been his second home for over 4 decades. 80 years old, who would have thought the dead last of the academy would make it this far? A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, though his voice carried less of its old energy these days. Shikamaru entered, now an old man himself, carrying a steaming cup of tea. "Figured you'd still be here. Hinata's worried, you know. Just thinking." Naruto accepted the tea gratefully. "Remember when we were kids and I said I'd become Hokage? You called it troublesome." "Still is," Shikamaru replied with a slight smile. "But you did it, protected everyone just like you promised." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun continued its descent. Naruto felt a strange lightness in his chest, different from the usual ache that had been growing stronger lately. It wasn't unpleasant, more like the feeling he'd had as a child when summer vacation stretched endlessly ahead. "Shikamaru," he said quietly, I think I'm ready." His old friend nodded, understanding immediately. They'd all known this day was coming. Any regrets? None, and it was true. Every mistake, every victory, every person he'd saved or failed to save, it had all led to this moment of perfect peace. "Tell everyone I said thank you, for letting me be part of their stories." The room grew still as Naruto closed his eyes. The last thing he heard was the whisper of autumn leaves against glass. Then light. "So, you're finally ready to let go." Naruto opened his eyes to find himself standing in an endless white space, face to face with a figure he'd met only once before but would never forget. The Sage of Six Paths looked exactly as he had during the war, ancient, wise, and impossibly serene. "Hagoromo-san." Naruto inclined his head respectfully. "I guess my time's up, huh?" "Time is a curious thing," the sage replied, his staff tapping softly against the ethereal ground. "For most souls, death marks the end of their story, but yours has always been different." "Different how?" The sage gestured, and the white space shimmered, showing glimpses of Naruto's life, his lonely childhood, his bonds with Team 7, his battles, his growth into a leader who truly understood what it meant to protect others. "The will of fire burns within you more purely than in any soul I've encountered across multiple worlds. Even now, after a life well lived, that flame refuses to be extinguished." Naruto felt a familiar stirring in his chest, that old restless energy that had driven him to never give up, no matter the odds. "Are you saying I'm not done yet?" "There is another world," Hagoromo said, his expression growing serious. "A place where magic flows like chakra once did, where the strong prey upon the weak, and where hope grows dim in the hearts of those born with nothing. They need someone who understands that true strength comes not from power, but from the will to protect others." Images flashed before Naruto's eyes, a land of kingdoms and magic, of floating grimoires and knights who soared through the sky. But beneath the wonder, he saw the same darkness he'd fought his entire life: prejudice, hatred, the endless cycle of those with power looking down on those without. "You're asking me to start over," Naruto realized. "New world, new life, new struggles." "I'm offering you a choice," the sage corrected. "You've earned your rest. No one would blame you for accepting the peace you found, but if you choose to continue—" "I won't remember everything at first, will I?" Naruto already knew the answer from the sage's expression. "Probably for the best. Hard to be a kid again when you've got an old man's memories weighing you down." He thought of all the people he'd left behind, the village he'd protected, the peace he'd helped build. Then he thought of the images he'd just seen: children with no hope, people crushing others' dreams simply because they could. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "When do I start?" The morning sun streamed through the window of the small room in Hage Village's church, and Naruto, though he still went by that name here, bolted upright with a gasp. The dreams again. They'd been getting stronger lately, more vivid. Images of himself as an old man, conversations with godlike beings, memories of a life that felt impossibly real but couldn't possibly be his. He was 15, had lived his entire life in this tiny village at the edge of the Forsaken Realm. So why did he sometimes catch himself expecting to see orange and blue instead of the simple brown clothes hanging on his chair? "Naruto, get up already." Asta's voice carried clearly through the thin walls, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Probably doing his morning exercises again. Right, today was the grimoire ceremony. The day every 15-year-old in the Clover Kingdom received their grimoire and took their first real step toward becoming a magic knight. The day that would determine whether his strange dreams meant anything or if he was just destined to be another powerless kid from the sticks. He dressed quickly and made his way to the common area, where Asta was indeed doing one-handed push-ups while Yuno sat calmly at the table, already dressed and apparently having been awake for hours. "Morning," Naruto said, grabbing a piece of bread from the counter. Something about the domestic scene felt familiar in a way that made his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. "You're cutting it close," Yuno observed without looking up from his book. "The ceremony starts in 2 hours. "Plenty of time," Naruto replied, though he was already wolfing down his breakfast. For some reason, he had this nagging feeling that being late would be incredibly embarrassing. Not that he had any evidence for this, he'd never been to a grimoire ceremony before. "Nervous?" Asta asked, finally stopping his exercises to join them at the table. Despite his small stature and complete lack of magical ability, there was something unshakable about his confidence. It reminded Naruto of, well, himself, oddly enough. "Should I be?" "Nah," Asta grinned widely. "I mean, yeah, this is the biggest day of our lives and it'll basically determine our entire futures, but what's the point of worrying? We just gotta give it everything we've got," Yuno sighed. "Your optimism is exhausting. And your pessimism is depressing," Naruto found himself saying, earning a sharp look from the dark-haired boy. "Come on, Yuno. When's the last time you actually smiled about something? I don't see much point in excessive displays of emotion." Something about that attitude rubbed Naruto the wrong way, though he couldn't put his finger on why. It felt like an old argument, an old frustration with someone who kept everyone at arm's length. "You know what your problem is?" Naruto leaned back in his chair, studying Yuno's carefully neutral expression. "You think caring about things makes you weak, but pushing people away, that's what's really weak." The silence that followed was loaded with tension. Asta looked back and forth between them like he was watching a tennis match. Yuno's golden eyes narrowed slightly. "And you think emotional outbursts make you strong? I think being honest about what matters to you makes you human." The words came out more heated than Naruto had intended. Where was this coming from? You can't protect anything if you don't admit you care about it in the first place. "Protect?" Yuno's voice carried a note of curiosity now. "That's an interesting choice of words. Most people our age think about what they want to achieve, not what they want to protect." Naruto paused, suddenly aware that he'd said something significant without meaning to. What did he want to protect? The village, obviously. Father Orsi and Sister Lily, who'd raised them. Asta, who never let the world's cruelty dim his smile. Even Yuno, annoying as he could be, but the feeling went deeper than that. Like there was something larger he was meant to safeguard, something he couldn't quite remember but knew was important. "I guess I just think there's more to being strong than winning fights," he said finally. Sister Lily chose that moment to enter the common room, her gentle presence immediately diffusing the tension. "Good morning, boys. Ready for your big day?" "Yes, sister." Asta jumped up so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. "I'm gonna get the strongest grimoire ever and become the Wizard King." "I'm sure you will, Asta." Sister Lily's smile was fond but sad. She knew as well as anyone that Asta's complete lack of magical ability made his dream nearly impossible. "What about you two? Any predictions for what kind of grimoires you'll receive?" Yuno shrugged. "Whatever I receive will be sufficient." "Modest as always," Naruto said dryly. "I honestly have no idea what to expect." That was true. Unlike most kids his age, who'd been demonstrating magical ability since they were young, Naruto had never shown any particular talent. He wasn't completely magicless like Asta, but the few times he'd tried to use magic, the results had been weird. Not weak, exactly, but different in ways that made the adults exchange concerned glances. "Well," Sister Lily said, "I'm sure you'll all receive exactly what you're meant to have. Now finish your breakfast and get ready. Father Orsi wants to leave early to make sure we get good seats." The tower in the town of Sashi was more impressive than Naruto had expected. Rising impossibly high into the sky, Its walls were covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and move in his peripheral vision. Hundreds of 15-year-olds from across the region had gathered for the ceremony, their excited chatter filling the air like static electricity. "Look at all of them," Asta breathed, his eyes wide as he took in the crowd. "They all look so confident. Most of them are from noble families," Yuno observed. "They've had magical training since they were children." Naruto watched a group of well-dressed teenagers demonstrating casual magic to each other, conjuring flowers, manipulating water, creating small lights that danced around their hands. They made it look effortless, like breathing. "Doesn't matter," he said, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. "Talent without hard work is just wasted potential, and hard work without heart is just going through the motions. The grimoires will choose based on who we really are, not where we come from." Both Asta and Yuno looked at him strangely. "You sound like you know something we don't," Yuno said. Naruto frowned. Did he? Sometimes words came out of his mouth that felt true in a way he couldn't explain, like he was remembering something rather than thinking it for the first time. "Just a feeling, I guess." The ceremony began with a speech from the local magistrate about the proud tradition of the Magic Knights and the importance of serving the kingdom. Naruto found his attention drifting, his eyes drawn to the tower itself. There was something about its presence that felt familiar, though he'd never been here before. "Citizens of the Clover Kingdom," the magistrate concluded, "step forward and receive the grimoires that will guide your destinies." The massive doors of the tower swung open, revealing a space that was somehow much larger inside than it appeared from the outside. Floating throughout the vast chamber were thousands of grimoires, each one glowing softly with its own inner light. Naruto felt his breath catch. The sight was beautiful, yes, but more than that, it felt right, like he was seeing something he'd been waiting his whole life to witness. The ceremony proceeded in rough order of social standing, with the noble children going first. One by one, grimoires floated down to choose their new owners. Most were 1- or 2-leaf clovers, perfectly respectable but nothing extraordinary. Then a 3-leaf grimoire descended toward a blue-haired girl from a minor noble family, and the crowd murmured appreciatively. 3-leaf grimoires were rare, marking their owners as having exceptional potential. "That's incredible," Asta whispered. "I've never seen a 3-leaf grimoire in person before." Naruto nodded absently, but his attention was focused on something else. Deep in the tower, among the highest floating grimoires, something was stirring. He couldn't see it clearly, but he could feel it, a presence that seemed to be watching him as intently as he was watching it. More children received their grimoires. The girl with the 3-leaf book was being congratulated by everyone around her, clearly the star of the ceremony so far. Then it was Yuno's turn. The dark-haired boy stepped forward calmly, showing none of the nervousness that seemed to affect even the noble children. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a grimoire began to descend from the very top of the tower. The crowd fell silent as they saw what it was, a 4-leaf clover, its pages gleaming with golden light. Even the magistrate looked stunned. "A 4-leaf clover grimoire," he announced, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. "The grimoire of legend, said to contain incredible luck and power beyond measure." Yuno caught the grimoire as it floated into his hands, his expression unchanged despite the magnitude of what had just happened. Of course, Naruto thought with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. Even receiving a legendary grimoire couldn't crack that perfect composure. The whispers started immediately. A commoner from the boonies receiving a 4-leaf grimoire, it was unheard of. The noble children were staring at Yuno with mixtures of awe, envy, and barely concealed resentment. Asta stepped forward next, his face bright with excitement and determination. "My turn," but as the minutes passed and no grimoire descended, his expression slowly shifted from confidence to confusion to growing despair. The crowd began to murmur, then talk openly. "Nothing's happening. Is he really magicless? How embarrassing." Naruto felt anger flare in his chest, hot and protective. Who were these people to judge Asta? So what if he didn't have magic? That didn't make him worth less than anyone else. "That's enough," he said, stepping up beside his friend. His voice wasn't particularly loud, but something in his tone made the nearest conversations falter. "Naruto," Asta said quietly, his usual cheerfulness cracked but not broken. "It's okay, I knew this might happen." "No, it's not okay." Naruto turned to face the crowd, and for a moment something flickered in his blue eyes, a flash of authority that seemed far older than his 15 years. "He's got more heart and determination than any 10 of you put together. If the grimoires can't see that, then maybe there's something wrong with the system." The magistrate cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should move on." "Wait." The voice that spoke wasn't Naruto's. It seemed to come from the tower itself, resonating through the stone and settling in everyone's bones. The floating grimoires began to move, swirling in slow spirals around the chamber. Then, from the very highest reaches of the tower, something began to descend. It wasn't like the other grimoires. Where they glowed with steady light, this one seemed to contain shifting shadows and flickering flames. As it drew closer, Naruto could see that it was bound in deep blue leather with silver clasps, and on its cover, 4 leaves. But unlike Yuno's golden grimoire, this one's Clover was rendered in what looked like liquid starlight, shifting between colors that didn't have names. The chamber fell completely silent as the grimoire floated down, passing Asta entirely and coming to rest in Naruto's outstretched hands. The moment his fingers touched the leather, the world exploded into sensation. Memories crashed over him like a tidal wave, a life lived in another world, another time. A boy with no parents and too much power who learned that strength meant nothing without people to protect. Friends who became family, enemies who became friends, a village that grew from seed to mighty tree under his protection. He remembered now, all of it, the sage of 6 paths, the choice. The promise to carry the will of fire into a new world. When the memories settled and his vision cleared, Naruto found himself surrounded by staring faces. The grimoire in his hands was warm, almost alive, and when he opened it, he saw pages covered with symbols that looked almost like chakra formulae but not quite. Another 4-leaf clover, the magistrate said weakly, 2 in one day, this is unprecedented. But Naruto barely heard him. He was focused on the grimoire, on the way it seemed to resonate with something deep in his chest. Experimentally, he reached out with his mana, letting it flow into the book. The response was immediate. Knowledge flooded his mind, not memories this time, but understanding. This world's magic system, and how his unique spiritual energy could work within it. Shadow clone magic, he whispered, reading from the first page that had appeared. He raised his hand, and mana flowed through him in patterns that felt both foreign and familiar. The technique was different from what he remembered, powered by this world's magic rather than chakra, but the principle was the same. Shadow Clone Jutsu, 3 perfect copies of himself materialized beside him, each one solid and real and grinning widely. The silence that followed was deafening. Then chaos erupted. People were shouting, pointing, backing away in shock and fear. Magic that created solid, thinking duplicates was supposed to be impossible. Even the most powerful mages could only create illusions or temporary constructs. But Naruto's clones were clearly real, each one moving independently, each one wearing his same confident smile. Well, one of the clones said, looking around at the panicking crowd. That's one way to make an impression. Think we overdid it? Another asked. Nah, the original Naruto replied, dismissing his duplicates with a wave of his hand. If we're gonna be magic knights, we might as well start as we mean to go on. He looked over at Asta, who was staring at him with stars in his eyes, then at Yuno, whose perfect composure had finally cracked into something resembling amazement. Besides, Naruto continued, his grin taking on a slightly mischievous edge, someone's got to shake things up around here. The magistrate was frantically shuffling through his papers, clearly trying to figure out what protocol existed for a situation like this. Finding none, he cleared his throat and attempted to regain control of the ceremony. Well, he said loudly, this has certainly been educational. I believe that concludes today's grimoire ceremony. All new grimoire holders are reminded that the Magic Knight's entrance exam will take place in 6 months' time in the royal capital. The Magic Knight's entrance exam. Naruto felt a familiar thrill run through him, not just excitement, but purpose. This was why he was here, not just to gain power, but to use it in service of others. He looked down at his grimoire again, at the impossible 4-leaf clover on its cover. 2 legendary grimoires given to 2 boys from nowhere. The nobles might not like it, but change was coming to the Clover Kingdom whether they wanted it or not. Hey, Asta said, finally finding his voice. Naruto, that was incredible. I've never seen magic like that before. Neither have I, Yuno admitted, though he was trying to hide his interest behind his usual mask of indifference. Where did you learn to do that? Naruto considered how to answer. The truth was too complicated, too unbelievable. And besides, some instinct told him that revealing too much too soon would only cause problems. I didn't learn it anywhere, he said finally. I just knew how, like the grimoire was teaching me. It wasn't entirely a lie. The grimoire had shown him how to adapt his old techniques to this world's magic system. But the foundation, the understanding of what those techniques could accomplish, that came from a lifetime of experience in another world. "That's not how magic works," Yuno said, but there was no accusation in his voice, just curiosity. "Maybe not," Naruto replied with a shrug. "But then again, most people say being magicless isn't how being a magic knight works either, and that's not stopping Asta." Asta's face lit up with renewed determination. "That's right. If Naruto can create impossible magic, then I can become the Wizard King without any magic at all. We'll show everyone that strength comes from the heart, not from what you're born with." Naruto felt a familiar warmth spread through his chest. Yeah, he thought this was why he'd chosen to come here. This feeling, this bond, this absolute certainty that some things were worth fighting for. "The entrance exam's in 6 months," he said, looking between his two closest friends. "Think that's enough time to get ready?" "For me, more than enough," Yuno said with his usual confidence. "For me, I'll make it enough," Asta declared. Naruto grinned. "Then I guess we better get started." As they walked away from the tower, grimoires in hand and dreams in their hearts, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows. Someone who had felt the dimensional ripple when Naruto's true memories awakened, someone who understood that the appearance of such unique magic could only mean one thing. Change was coming to the Clover Kingdom indeed. The only question was whether that change would save the world or destroy it. But that was a worry for another day. For now, Naruto was content to walk between his friends, feeling the weight of his grimoire at his side and the familiar fire of determination burning in his chest. He had work to do. The training ground behind Hage Village's church had seen better days. What had once been a neat patch of grass was now a collection of craters, scorch marks, and one particularly impressive furrow that stretched nearly 30 feet, courtesy of Yuno testing out his wind magic 3 days after the grimoire ceremony. Naruto stood at the edge of the latest crater, grimoire floating open beside him as he studied the technique inscribed on its pages. 2 weeks had passed since that chaotic day at the tower, and he'd been pushing himself harder than ever, trying to understand exactly what he was capable of in this new world. "Again," he muttered to himself, raising his hand toward a cluster of practice dummies Father Orsi had set up. Shadow clone magic, multi-strike formation. 5 clones materialized around the dummies, each one taking a different angle of attack. But instead of simply rushing in like he would have in his previous life, Naruto had been experimenting with combinations, using this world's magic to enhance techniques that had once relied purely on chakra. The clones moved in perfect synchronization, each one charging a ball of concentrated mana in their palms. Not quite the Rasengan, he hadn't figured out how to make it spiral properly yet, but close enough to pack serious punch. 5 impacts hit simultaneously, reducing the practice dummies to splinters and kindling. "Impressive," came Yuno's voice from behind him, "but sloppy." Naruto dismissed his clones and turned to face his rival, who was approaching with his usual perfect posture and irritatingly pristine appearance. Even after morning training, Yuno somehow managed to look like he'd just stepped out of a noble's portrait. "Sloppy how? You're wasting mana," Yuno explained, his own grimoire floating beside him. "Each clone requires a significant portion of your magical power to maintain. Creating 5 at once for a simple attack is inefficient." "Maybe," Naruto conceded. "But what if I need to protect 5 different people at the same time? Efficiency doesn't matter if someone gets hurt because I held back." Something flickered across Yuno's expression, surprise, maybe, or recognition. "You're always thinking about protecting people. Why?" The question hit deeper than Naruto had expected. Images flashed through his mind. Iruka-sensei bleeding on the forest floor, Sasuke walking away into the darkness, Pain's devastation of Konoha, countless faces of people he'd saved and people he'd failed to save. "I guess because I know what it feels like to need protecting," he said finally, "and I know what it feels like when no one comes." Yuno was quiet for a long moment, studying Naruto with those sharp golden eyes. "You never talk about your life before Hage Village. Where did you come from really?" Naruto felt his heart skip. He'd been careful, so careful, about not revealing too much about his past life. But sometimes the memories bled through in ways he couldn't control, especially when he was training or fighting. "Same place as you and Asta," he said, forcing casualness into his voice. "Found on the church doorstep as a baby, no idea who my parents were." "That's not what I meant." Yuno's tone carried a note of frustration that was unusual for him. "You fight like someone with years of experience. You understand tactics that most magic knight captains wouldn't think of, and your magic," he gestured at the destroyed training ground. "Creating solid clones shouldn't be possible. The mana cost alone should kill you." Naruto opened his mouth to deflect again, but stopped when he saw the genuine concern in Yuno's eyes. For all his emotional distance, Yuno wasn't stupid, and he wasn't heartless. He was worried. What if I told you I sometimes dream about being someone else? Naruto said carefully. Someone older who lived a completely different life. I'd say that sounds like reincarnation, Yuno replied without missing a beat. Which is supposed to be impossible. Yeah, well, so is solid clone magic. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken questions hanging between them. Finally, Yuno shook his head. It doesn't matter, he said. Whatever you were before, whatever knowledge you might have, you're here now. You're part of this world. That's what counts. Naruto felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with mana. Thanks, Yuno. Don't misunderstand, Yuno added quickly, his usual aloofness reasserting itself. I'm only saying that because you'll need every advantage you can get to keep up with me at the entrance exam. Naruto grinned. Is that a challenge? It's a fact. What are you guys talking about? Astaz's voice boomed across the training ground as he bounded toward them, somehow managing to carry what looked like a full-sized boulder over his head. Are we having a rivalry moment without me? We were having a conversation, Yuno said with a slight wince. There's a difference. Conversations are just rivalries without the shouting, Astaz declared, setting down his boulder with an earth-shaking thud. So what are we competing about today? Naruto looked at his two friends. Because that's what they were, he realized, friends in the truest sense, and felt that familiar fire kindle in his chest. The will of fire burning as bright in this world as it had in his last. Training, he said. We've got 4.5 months until the entrance exam, time to get serious. By noon, the training ground looked like a battlefield. Astaz had punched holes clean through 3 trees. Yuno had carved wind-slice patterns into a granite boulder. And Naruto had created enough clone impacts to turn the grass into something resembling a moonscape. They collapsed in the shade of one of the few surviving trees, breathing hard but energized by the progress they'd made. Your physical conditioning is insane, Naruto said to Astaz between gulps of water. I've never seen anyone build muscle that fast. Gotta make up for having no magic somehow, Astaz replied cheerfully. Besides, Sister Lily says I'm naturally gifted at punching things. She actually said you were naturally gifted at getting into trouble, Yuno corrected. The punching was implied. Same difference, Naruto found himself laughing, the sound carrying a note of genuine joy that surprised him. When was the last time he'd felt this light? Not the peaceful contentment of his later years as Hokage, but the wild, boundless optimism of youth. You know what I realized, he said, leaning back against the tree trunk. We're actually a pretty good team. Astaz got the physical power, Yuno's got precision and control, and I've got, he paused, thinking, flexibility, I guess, adaptability. Chaos, Yuno said dryly. You've got chaos, productive chaos. There's no such thing as productive chaos. Tell that to my clones. Their banter was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching across the training ground. Sister Lily emerged from the tree line, carrying a basket that smelled like fresh bread and honey. I thought you boys might be getting hungry, she said with a gentle smile. And I wanted to see how your training was progressing. Sister Lily, Astaz shot to his feet so quickly he nearly fell over. Did you see my new punching technique? I can break rocks now. I saw the evidence, she replied, glancing at the thoroughly demolished training area. Very impressive, Astaz, all of you actually. You've made remarkable progress in just 2 weeks. She settled gracefully on a fallen log, arranging her skirts carefully, and began unpacking lunch. There was something about the domestic scene that tugged at Naruto's memories, not the grand moments of his past life, but the quiet ones. Meals with Team 7, lazy afternoons with friends, the simple pleasure of being part of a family. Sister Lily, he said impulsively, what do you think it means to be strong? She paused in her distribution of sandwiches, considering the question seriously. That's a profound question, Naruto. Why do you ask? Just something I've been thinking about. Everyone talks about strength like it's just about magical power or physical ability. But that can't be all there is to it, right? Definitely not, Astaz chimed in. I mean, I've got no magic at all, but I'm still gonna become the Wizard King. Statistically unlikely, Yuno murmured, earning himself an indignant sputter from Astaz. Sister Lily smiled at their antics before turning her attention back to Naruto. I think true strength comes from understanding what you're fighting for, she said. Anyone can throw a punch or cast a spell. But knowing why you're doing it, being willing to sacrifice for something greater than yourself, that's what separates a strong person from a merely powerful one. What about when you have to choose? Naruto asked quietly. When protecting one person means you can't protect another. The question came from a deeper place than he'd intended, dredging up memories of impossible choices and the weight of leadership. Sister Lily's expression grew thoughtful, and he realized she was seeing more in his question than a simple philosophical discussion. Have you had to make choices like that, Naruto? Not in this life, he thought. But the memories of his previous existence were becoming more integrated with his current self, and sometimes it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Not yet, he said honestly, but I feel like I will. Soon, maybe. Then I think, Sister Lily said gently, that you need to trust yourself to make the right choice when the time comes. And remember that sometimes the right choice isn't about saving everyone, it's about being willing to try, even when you know you might fail. Her words hit him like a physical blow, resonating with something deep in his soul. How many times had he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, convinced that every failure was his personal responsibility? Thank you, he said, and meant it. The afternoon training session was different. Instead of working separately, they began practicing combinations, trying to figure out how their very different abilities could complement each other. Okay, Naruto said, studying a new technique that had appeared in his grimoire. I think I'm ready to try something new, but I'm gonna need both of you to spot me just in case. What kind of just in case? Yuno asked suspiciously. The kind where I might accidentally blow myself up. That's not reassuring, Asta pointed out. Which is why I need you guys watching out for me. Naruto grinned at their worried expressions. Come on, where's your sense of adventure? I left it back when you created 5 clones and nearly passed out from mana exhaustion, Yuno replied. That was different. I've been practicing mana control since then. With his friends positioned at a safe distance, Naruto opened his grimoire to a page that had only recently become legible to him. The technique diagram was more complex than shadow clone magic, requiring precise mana manipulation and perfect concentration. Spiraling mana sphere, he read aloud. He raised his right hand, palm up, and began to channel mana into it. But instead of simply forming a ball of compressed energy like he'd been doing with his clones, he tried to remember the feeling of creating a Rasengan. The way chakra had to be rotated in multiple directions simultaneously, contained but never truly stable. The mana responded differently than chakra had. Where chakra was warm and flowing, mana felt sharper, more crystalline. But the principle was the same: rotation, compression, containment. A sphere of swirling blue energy formed in his palm, no larger than a baseball but spinning so fast it created a high-pitched whine in the air. Incredible, Yuno breathed. The mana density is off the charts. Is it supposed to sound like that? Asta asked nervously. Naruto didn't answer. He was too focused on maintaining the delicate balance of forces in his hand. One wrong move and the technique would either dissipate harmlessly or explode with enough force to level a small building. Finally, when he was sure he had control, he looked around for a target. The boulder Yuno had been practicing on earlier would do nicely. He sprinted forward, drawing back his arm, and drove the spiraling mana sphere into the center of the massive stone. The result was spectacular. The boulder didn't just shatter, it pulverized, turning into dust and gravel that scattered in a perfect circle around the point of impact. The technique had carved a sphere-shaped crater nearly 3 feet deep into the ground beneath. Naruto stared at the destruction, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and unease. He'd done it, successfully adapted one of his signature techniques to this world's magic system, but the power was almost scary. In his previous life, the Rasengan had been devastating but controllable. This version felt harder to predict. That, Yuno said slowly, was not a normal spell. None of my magic is normal, Naruto replied, dismissing his grimoire. I'm starting to think that's the point. What do you mean? Naruto considered how to explain the feeling that had been growing stronger over the past few weeks. The sense that his reincarnation hadn't been random, that he'd been sent to this world for a specific purpose. I think maybe I'm supposed to shake things up, he said finally. This kingdom has been stuck in the same patterns for centuries. Maybe it needs someone who doesn't follow the rules. Before either of his friends could respond, they were interrupted by a new voice. Excuse me, are you the boys from the grimoire ceremony 2 weeks ago? They turned to see a man in his 30s approaching across the ruined training ground. He was dressed in the robes of a magic knight, though Naruto couldn't immediately identify which squad based on the insignia. Depends who's asking, Yuno replied cautiously. The man smiled. My name is Walter Grinburial, and I'm a recruiter for the Magic Knights. I was hoping to speak with you about the entrance exam. A recruiter. Naruto felt his pulse quicken with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This was it, the first real step toward becoming a Magic Knight. What about it? Asta asked, his earlier wariness forgotten in the face of his enthusiasm. Well, Walter said, his gaze moving between the three of them before settling on Naruto. Word has gotten around about some unusual magic being demonstrated lately. Creating solid clones, techniques that don't match any known magical theory. His eyes took in the pulverized remains of the boulder and the crater it had left behind. I take it that was your work. Guilty, Naruto admitted. Fascinating, I don't suppose you'd be willing to demonstrate again. Naruto exchanged glances with his friends, then shrugged. Sure, but maybe something smaller this time. He formed another spiraling monosphere, this one only half the size of the previous attempt, and launched it at a tree stump 20 feet away. The result was the same, complete obliteration of the target and a perfectly round crater in the earth. Walter's eyes were wide with what looked like a mixture of amazement and concern. That's not any magical theory I've ever encountered. Where did you learn to do that? I didn't learn it anywhere, Naruto said honestly. It just came to me when I got my grimoire. And the clones, same thing. Walter was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing what he'd seen. When he spoke again, his tone was more serious. I'm going to be completely honest with you boys, he said. The entrance exam is in 4 months. Most of the candidates will be from noble families, with years of formal magical training and connections within the Magic Knight squads. You're starting from a significant disadvantage. We know that, Yuno said simply. But, Walter continued, you also have something most of those candidates don't, raw talent and genuine motivation. Especially you, he added, looking at Naruto. Magic like yours doesn't come along often. With the right preparation, you could make a real impression at the exam. What kind of preparation? Asta asked eagerly. Combat training primarily, learning to work as a team, understanding Magic Knight protocols and procedures, and most importantly, Walter's expression grew grave, learning to control your power in high-stress situations. The exam isn't just about strength, it's about judgment, restraint, and the ability to protect others even when you're afraid. Naruto felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the way Walter had phrased that last part suggested he knew more about the exam's challenges than he was letting on. There's something else, Walter continued. Something I probably shouldn't tell you, but I think you need to know. There are rumors that this year's exam might be different, more dangerous than usual. How so? Yuno asked sharply. I can't say for certain. But there are whispers about terrorist activity, about groups that want to disrupt the Magic Knight's recruitment process. If those rumors are true, then this year's candidates might face real combat situations, not just tests. The training ground fell silent as the implications sank in. They'd been preparing for an exam, but they might actually be preparing for war. All the more reason to get stronger, Naruto said finally. If there are people out there who want to hurt innocent candidates, then someone needs to be ready to stop them. Walter studied him for a moment, then nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of attitude the Magic Knights are looking for. I think you three have a real chance of making it through the exam, but only if you're willing to push yourselves harder than you ever have before. We are, Asta declared immediately. Definitely, Yuno added. Absolutely, Naruto agreed. Good. Walter pulled out a small scroll from his robes and handed it to Naruto. These are some advanced training exercises designed for candidates who show exceptional promise. Don't try them all at once. Some of these techniques have killed overconfident recruits in the past. Naruto accepted the scroll, feeling its weight like a responsibility. Thank you. We won't waste this opportunity. I hope not, Walter said. The kingdom needs Magic Knights who are willing to protect others, not just accumulate power for themselves. Based on what I've seen today, I think you understand that distinction. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, the exam will be held in the royal capital in 4 months' time. I suggest you arrive a few days early to get acclimated. The capital can be overwhelming for people from rural areas. We'll be ready, Naruto promised. I believe you will be. After Walter left, the three friends stood in the ruins of their training ground, each lost in their own thoughts. So, Asta said finally, that just happened. Real combat, Yuno murmured. The exam might involve actual fighting, which means we need to get a lot stronger really fast, Naruto concluded. He looked down at the scroll in his hands, then at his friends. Are you guys sure about this? Once we start down this path, there's no going back. We'll be putting ourselves in real danger. Are you kidding? Asta's grin was brilliant. This is what I've been training for my whole life. Bring on the danger. The path of a Magic Knight was never going to be safe, Yuno added. If we're not willing to face danger, we don't deserve to wear the robes. Naruto felt that familiar warmth spread through his chest, the feeling of being part of something larger than himself, of having comrades who would stand with him no matter what. "All right then," he said, unrolling the scroll to reveal complex diagrams and training regimens. "Let's get started." As the sun began to set over Hage Village, 3 boys stood together in the ruins of their training ground, studying techniques that would push them to their limits and beyond. They didn't know what challenges awaited them in the royal capital or whether they would be strong enough to face them. But they knew they would face them together, and for now, that was enough. That night, as the village settled into sleep around them, Naruto lay in his small bed staring at the ceiling. The training scroll was spread out on his desk, its contents memorized but still daunting. Some of the techniques Walter had given them were variations on standard Magic Knight combat spells. Others were more advanced, requiring precise mana control and split-second timing. And a few looked like they were designed to push a mage past their normal limits, to force them to access power they didn't know they had. The kind of techniques that could make someone incredibly strong or kill them in the attempt. Naruto rolled over, pressing his face into his pillow. In his previous life, he'd always been willing to risk everything for his comrades, his village, his ideals. But that had been his choice, his risk to take. Now he was leading Asta and Yuno down the same dangerous path. Was he being a good friend, or was he endangering them? The answer came to him in Asta's voice, echoing from that afternoon. "This is what I've been training for my whole life. And if we're not willing to face danger, we don't deserve to wear the robes." They weren't following him blindly. They were choosing this path for their own reasons, driven by their own dreams and determination. All he could do was make sure they were as prepared as possible for whatever was coming. Rolling out of bed, Naruto moved to his desk and began studying the training scroll again. If they were going to face real combat in 4 months, then he needed to be ready to protect his friends. Even if it meant pushing himself to the breaking point. Even if it meant revealing more of his true nature than he was comfortable with. The will of fire burned bright in his chest, a reminder of who he was and what he stood for. He'd been given a second chance in this world, and he wasn't going to waste it, no matter what it cost him. The royal capital was nothing like Hage Village. Naruto pressed his face against the window of the rickety transport cart, watching in amazement as the city sprawled out before them. Towering spires reached toward the clouds, their surfaces gleaming with magical energy. Flying carpets and brooms wove between the buildings like schools of fish, carrying elegantly dressed mages on errands that probably cost more than most people in the Forsaken Realm made in a year. "Would you stop gawking?" Yuno said from across the cart, though Naruto caught him sneaking glances out his own window. "You're embarrassing us." "Let him look," Asta laughed, somehow managing to bounce with excitement even while sitting down. "I've never seen anything like this either. Look at all those magic knights flying around, and the buildings, and the oh wow, is that guy riding a dragon?" "That's a wyvern," Yuno corrected automatically. "And it's probably just a familiar, not an actual mount." "Still counts as dragon adjacent." Naruto grinned at his friend's banter, but part of his mind was already working, cataloging details that might be important later. Guard positions, patrol routes, escape routes if things went badly. Old habits from a lifetime of dangerous missions died hard, even in a new world. The cart shuddered to a halt outside a massive coliseum that looked like it could hold half the population of the Clover Kingdom. Magic Knight banners fluttered from every tower, and crowds of applicants were already gathering near the entrance. "This is it," Naruto said, shouldering his pack. "Everyone ready? Been ready for months," Asta declared, leaping down from the cart with his usual boundless energy. "As ready as one can be for an unpredictable examination," Yuno added, though his golden eyes were bright with anticipation. They joined the crowd of applicants streaming toward the Coliseum entrance. Naruto found himself studying the other candidates, their posture, their confidence levels, the quality of their equipment. Most were clearly from noble families, their robes expensive and their magical accessories top tier. They moved in small clusters, eyeing the competition with barely concealed disdain when they noticed the commoners among them. "Look at that group over there," one noble boy said loudly, not bothering to lower his voice. "Are those actually commoners? In the royal capital, how did they even afford the travel fare?" His friends laughed, the sound carrying clearly across the crowd. Naruto felt Asta tense beside him, but before his friend could respond, another voice cut through the laughter. "Maybe they walked," a girl with silver hair said coolly, appearing beside the group of nobles like she'd materialized from thin air. "Some people are willing to work for what they want instead of having it handed to them." The noble boy flushed red. "And you are Noel Silva," she replied, and the name sent a ripple of whispers through the nearby crowd. "Silva, one of the most powerful noble families in the kingdom. And you're being loud enough to embarrass your entire bloodline, so perhaps you should save your energy for the actual exam." She walked away without waiting for a response, leaving the noble boys stammering behind her. But not before she glanced back at Naruto and his friends, something almost like approval flickering in her violet eyes. "Well," Naruto said quietly, "that was interesting." "She's right though," Asta said, his earlier anger replaced by admiration. "Actions matter more than words. Silva family," murmured. "Water magic, if I remember correctly, very powerful." They made their way into the Colosseum, where hundreds of applicants were gathering in the central arena. The stands above were filled with spectators, Magic Knight captains, nobles, and what looked like reporters from various publications. This wasn't just an exam, Naruto realized. It was a public spectacle. A figure appeared on the central platform with a small explosion of light, a tall man with messy blonde hair and an almost childlike grin. Magic seemed to shimmer around him like heat waves, and when he spoke, his voice carried easily across the entire arena without any magical amplification. "Welcome, future Magic Knights," he called out, and the crowd fell silent instantly. "I am Julius Novachrono, the 28th Wizard King of the Clover Kingdom," the Wizard King himself. Naruto felt a strange mixture of awe and recognition, not because he'd met Julius before, but because something about the man's presence reminded him of other great leaders he'd known. There was power there, yes, but more importantly, there was genuine care for the people he protected. "Today," Julius continued, his grin widening, "you'll be tested on the 3 fundamental qualities every Magic Knight must possess: magical power, teamwork, and the judgment to protect others even at personal cost." He gestured, and 3 massive structures rose from the arena floor: a crystalline tower that sparkled with trapped lightning, a maze of floating platforms over a churning whirlpool, and what looked like a miniature city populated with magical constructs. "Your first test, raw power. Unleash your strongest attack against the crystal tower. Don't hold back, these crystals are designed to absorb and measure magical energy." Applicants began lining up in front of the tower, each one stepping forward to demonstrate their abilities. Nobles went first, naturally, their attacks lighting up the crystal with impressive displays of fire, ice, lightning, and earth. "Sek Bronzaza," one boy announced himself pompously before launching what looked like a giant bronze cannonball. The crystal absorbed it with a bright flash, displaying his power level as a respectable but unremarkable number. More applicants followed, some impressive, others less so. Then it was Yuno's turn. He stepped forward calmly, his grimoire floating beside him with pages turning of their own accord. "Wind magic, towering tornado." A massive spiral of wind erupted from his hands, slamming into the crystal with enough force to make the entire structure vibrate. The power reading that appeared made several of the Magic Knight captains sit up and take notice. "Incredible," Julius exclaimed, practically bouncing with excitement. "Four-leaf grimoire magic. How fascinating." Yuno returned to the group without fanfare, but Naruto caught the slight smile on his lips. "Show off," he thought fondly. Asta went next, and the crowd watched in fascination as he approached the crystal with no grimoire at all. He drew his sword, a massive, unwieldy thing that looked more like a slab of metal than a blade, and swung it at the crystal. The result was immediate and shocking. Instead of absorbing the attack like it had every other one, the crystal went completely dark. The magical energy that had been building up inside it simply vanished. "Anti-magic," someone in the crowd whispered. "That boy has anti-magic." Julius leaned forward, his eyes wide with genuine amazement. "Extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it." The crystal flickered back to life as Asta stepped away, but the impression had been made. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some amazed, others disturbed by the display of power that could simply negate magic entirely. Then it was Naruto's turn. He walked to the crystal, very aware of the hundreds of eyes watching his every move. His grimoire floated beside him, its impossible 4-leaf clover cover drawing gasps from those who could see it clearly. But instead of immediately attacking, he paused, studying the crystal structure. In his previous life, he'd learned that the most impressive technique wasn't always the most powerful. Sometimes it was the one that showed the most control, the most understanding. Shadow clone magic, resonance formation. 20 clones materialized around the crystal in a perfect circle, each one raising their hands toward the structure. But instead of attacking separately, they began to channel their mana in harmony, creating a complex pattern of energy that spiraled around the crystal like a DNA helix. The The crystal didn't just light up, it sang, producing a pure tone that resonated through the arena as the magical energy built in perfect mathematical progression. When Naruto finally released the technique, the resulting explosion of light was so bright that people had to shield their eyes. When the glow faded, the power reading displayed was higher than any other candidate's, but more importantly, the crystal itself had been transformed. Instead of its original rough shape, it was now a perfect sphere, its surface polished to mirror brightness by the precise application of magical force. The arena was dead silent for a long moment. Then Julius started laughing, not mockingly, but with pure, delighted amazement. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful, not just power, but artistry. I've never seen magic used with such precision and creativity. The crowd erupted into whispers and speculation. Naruto dismissed his clones and walked back to his friends, trying to ignore the stares following him. "Show off," Yuno said, but there was respect in his voice. "That was incredible," Asta exclaimed. "How did you make it sing like that?" "Harmonic resonance," Naruto replied. "When you match the natural frequency of a magical construct, you can amplify its properties instead of just overwhelming them." Several nearby applicants turned to stare at him, clearly impressed by the technical explanation. But Naruto's attention was focused on the viewing stands, where he could see several Magic Knight captains engaged in animated discussions. "Second test," Julius announced, his voice cutting through the crowd noise. "Teamwork and problem-solving." The maze of floating platforms activated, revealing its full complexity. Magical creatures, birds with razor-sharp feathers and lightning-fast reflexes, began swarming through the structure. The goal was simple. Teams of 3 had to navigate the maze and capture as many birds as possible in 10 minutes. "Choose your teams," Julius called out. "Remember, Magic Knights must be able to work with anyone, regardless of background or magical specialty." Most applicants immediately gravitated toward people they knew or others from similar social backgrounds. But Naruto noticed something else. Several promising-looking candidates were being left out, either because they seemed too weak or because their social status didn't match. "Hey," he called out to a nervous-looking girl who'd been standing alone. "Want to team up? I saw your plant magic during the power test. It was really impressive." The girl, Ringard, if he remembered her introduction correctly, looked shocked that anyone had noticed her, let alone complimented her abilities. You want me on your team?" she stammered. "Absolutely. Plant magic is perfect for controlling terrain and creating barriers. With the right coordination, we could lock down entire sections of the maze." He looked around and spotted another lone candidate, a tall boy with wild hair who demonstrated solid earth magic earlier. "You too, if you're interested. Earth magic for structural support, plant magic for control, and I can provide mobility with my clones." The boy Magnus Swing, based on his earlier introduction, grinned widely. "Hell yeah. Let's show these nobles how commoners really fight." Within minutes, teams were entering the maze from different starting points. Naruto watched the other group's strategies as they moved. Most were relying on brute force, trying to overwhelm the magical birds with powerful area attacks. It was effective but wasteful, and the birds were learning to avoid the most obvious attack patterns. "Okay," he said to his teammates as they approached their starting platform. "And I need you to create a network of vines throughout this section of the maze, not to trap the birds directly, but to give us early warning when they approach. Magna, can you create earth platforms to give us elevated positions?" "You got it." Magna slammed his fist into the nearest platform, and stone pillars began rising at strategic points throughout their section. "What about the birds themselves?" En asked, already sending tendrils of plant matter spreading through the maze structure. "Leave those to me," Naruto said, creating a dozen shadow clones. "But here's the key, we're not just trying to catch the most birds, we're trying to do it while helping other teams succeed too." His teammates looked at him like he was crazy. "Why would we help the competition?" Magna asked. "Because," Naruto said, positioning his clones throughout the maze, Magic Knights are supposed to protect people, not just beat them. If we can show teamwork on a larger scale, helping other candidates even while completing our own objectives, that's the kind of leadership quality they're really looking for." The test began, and chaos erupted throughout the maze. Birds streaked through the air like living lightning, their sharp feathers slicing through magical attacks and physical barriers alike. Most teams were struggling, their coordination falling apart under pressure. But Naruto's team moved like clockwork. En's plant network gave them perfect information about bird movements, Magna's platforms provided ideal positioning, and Naruto's clones could be everywhere at once, herding birds toward capture zones or providing assistance to struggling teams. Team to our left is in trouble, N reported, her eyes closed as she felt through her vine network. 3 birds have them pinned down and one of their members is injured. Magna, can you get me a platform over there? Already on it. Naruto shadow-cloned his way across the maze, arriving just in time to help a team of noble applicants who were clearly overwhelmed. Instead of stealing their targets, he used his clones to create a coordinated capture strategy that netted them more birds than they would have managed alone. Why? One of them asked, staring at him in confusion. We're competing against each other. Today we're competitors, Naruto replied, already moving toward another struggling team. Tomorrow we might be squadmates. Either way, Magic Knights look out for each other. By the end of the 10-minute period, Naruto's team had captured an impressive number of birds, but more importantly, they'd assisted 7 other teams in completing their objectives. Several applicants who might have failed the test entirely were now advancing to the final round. Julius was practically glowing with approval as the results were announced. Outstanding teamwork and leadership, he called out. This is exactly the kind of thinking the Magic Knights need. The final test was the most complex, a simulated combat scenario in the miniature city. Magical constructs played the role of civilians in danger, while other constructs acted as enemies. Teams had to rescue as many civilians as possible while minimizing collateral damage. But as the test began, something went wrong. The enemy constructs began moving faster, hitting harder than they should have for a training exercise. Naruto watched in growing alarm as several applicants were seriously injured by attacks that should have been mostly harmless. Something's not right, he said to Asta and Yuno, who had naturally gravitated back to him for the final test. These constructs are operating way outside normal parameters. Sabotage, Yuno asked grimly, has to be. Naruto's mind was already working, analyzing the situation from every angle. The question is whether it's an outside attack or part of the test itself. Their question was answered when hooded figures began materializing throughout the arena, not constructs, but real people with real magic and very hostile intentions. Eye of the Midnight Sun, one of them announced, his voice carrying across the chaos. We've come to demonstrate the weakness of the current system. Watch as your precious applicants fall before true power, panic erupted throughout the arena. Some applicants froze in terror, others attacked blindly, and still others tried to flee. But Naruto felt something else entirely, a familiar calm settling over him, the same focused clarity he'd experienced in countless dangerous situations throughout his previous life. Asta Yuno, he said quietly, his voice cutting through their shock. We've got work to do. These guys are way stronger than us, Asta protested, though he was already drawing his anti-magic sword. Maybe individually, Naruto agreed, shadow clones spreading out across the arena, but we're not fighting individually. Everyone, he raised his voice, addressing the other applicants. Stop panicking and start thinking. You want to be Magic Knights? Then act like it. Protect the people around you. His words cut through the chaos, and several applicants began organizing defensive formations instead of attacking randomly. Naruto's clones coordinated the effort, providing information and tactical support, while the real Naruto engaged one of the terrorists directly. The man was strong, definitely Magic Knight captain level or higher. His shadow magic could create solid constructs that hit like sledgehammers and moved faster than most people could track. But Naruto had advantages the terrorists didn't know about. Decades of combat experience, knowledge of tactics and strategies that didn't exist in this world. And most importantly, the absolute conviction that he would not let innocent people be hurt on his watch. Spiraling Mana Sphere, he launched his adapted Rasengan at the terrorist's largest shadow construct, the attack punching clean through the magical darkness and forcing his opponent to dodge. Impossible, the man snarled. That technique, it's not from this world. Naruto felt a chill. This terrorist knew something about his abilities that he shouldn't, but there was no time to pursue that thought. More enemies were appearing, and the other applicants were starting to falter under the assault. New plan, he called out, his voice carrying across the arena. Everyone with defensive magic, create barriers around the civilians. Offensive specialists, coordinate your attacks, don't waste mana on individual techniques. Support types help coordinate and provide backup. The response was immediate and heartening. Noble and commoner applicants worked together, combining their abilities in ways that multiplied their effectiveness. Noel Silva created massive water barriers, while Magna provided explosive fire support. En's plant magic created evacuation routes, while other applicants guided civilians to safety. And in the center of it all, Yuno and a staff fought beside Naruto like they'd been a team their whole lives. Yuno's wind magic provided ranged precision strikes, Asta's anti-magic disrupted enemy spells, and Naruto's clones were everywhere, coordinating the defense and providing tactical support. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. When the smoke finally cleared, the terrorists had been defeated or driven off, the civilians were safe, and not a single applicant had been killed, though many were injured. Julius appeared on the arena floor, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grim determination. Medical teams attend to the injured immediately. All applicants who participated in the defense, regardless of your earlier test scores, have passed the examination. He paused, his eyes finding Naruto in the crowd. Exceptional leadership under extreme circumstances. That's what separates true magic knights from mere spell slingers. The selection ceremony took place that evening, after the injured had been treated and the arena had been cleared of debris. The surviving applicants stood in neat rows while the Magic Knight captains made their selections. Naruto watched as one by one, his fellow examinees were chosen by various squads. Yuno was selected by the Golden Dawn, no surprise there, given his four-leaf grimoire and obvious talent. Several other promising candidates went to the Silver Eagles, Azure Deer, and Crimson Lions. When Asta's name was called, silence fell over the assembly. None of the captains raised their hands. Naruto felt anger flare in his chest, but before he could say anything, a new voice spoke up from the back of the assembly. "I'll take him." A tall, muscular man with a cigarette hanging from his lips stepped forward. His black bull's robe was wrinkled and stained, and there was something dangerous in his dark eyes. "Yami Sukahiro," Julius said with barely concealed amusement. "I should have known you'd be interested in the anti-magic user." "Kids got guts," Yami replied with a shrug. "That's rarer than talent these days." Asta looked like he was about to cry with relief and gratitude. Thank you so much, I won't let you down." Yeah, Yami waved him off. "Just try not to die in your first week." Then Naruto's name was called, and suddenly every captain's hand shot up. The Golden Dawn captain leaned forward. Four-leaf grimoire, exceptional magical innovation, clear leadership potential. He belongs with the elite. Exceptional combat effectiveness and tactical thinking, countered the Crimson Lions captain. He's a natural warrior. His plant magic coordination shows deep understanding of support roles, added the Azure Deer captain. But Naruto barely heard them. His eyes were fixed on Yami Sukahiro, who hadn't raised his hand but was watching the proceedings with obvious interest. "Thank you for the offers," Naruto said, his voice carrying clearly across the assembly. "But I'd like to join the Black Bulls." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Black Bulls were notoriously the bottom-ranked squad, filled with misfits and troublemakers. Why would someone with his obvious potential choose them? Yami raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that, kid? The Black Bulls ain't exactly prestigious." "I'm sure," Naruto said firmly. "Prestige doesn't mean much if you're not fighting for something you believe in. And I believe in giving people chances, regardless of where they come from." Something shifted in Yami's expression, surprise, maybe, or approval. "All right then, welcome to the Black Bulls, kid. Try to keep up." As the ceremony concluded and new Magic Knights began making their way to their respective squads, Naruto found himself walking beside Asta toward a very uncertain future. "Why?" Asta asked quietly. "You could have joined any squad you wanted. The Golden Dawn, the Crimson Lions. Instead you chose us misfits." Naruto thought about it for a moment, then grinned, because misfits are the people who change the world. Elite squads maintain the status quo, but if you really want to make a difference, you need people who aren't afraid to break the rules. Even if it means starting at the bottom. "Especially then," Naruto replied. "The bottom is the only place you can go but up." As they approached the Black Bull's base, a ramshackle building that looked like it might collapse if someone sneezed too hard, Naruto felt that familiar fire kindle in his chest. The will of fire, burning as bright in this world as it had in his last. He had work to do, comrades to protect, and a world to change, just like old times. The Black Bull's headquarters was exactly as chaotic as Naruto had expected, and somehow even worse. He ducked as a chair sailed over his head, launched by a pink-haired girl who was chasing a boy with ash-blonde hair around the common room. Someone else was passed out face-first in a bowl of what might have been soup, while another squad member practiced magic that seemed to involve turning his body parts into various weapons. "Welcome to hell," Yami said dryly, not bothering to duck when a mug of ale flew past his ear. "Everyone, we've got new recruits." The chaos stopped instantly, every eye in the room turning toward Naruto and Asta. The silence was somehow more unnerving than the noise had been. "Fresh meat," the pink-haired girl exclaimed, abandoning her pursuit to bounce over to them. "I'm Vanessa Inotka. Are you single? Please tell me at least one of you is single and interesting." Asta squeaked, his face turning bright red. "I'm Naruto," Naruto said with a grin, extending his hand. "And yeah, single, but probably not as interesting as you're hoping." "We'll see about that," Vanessa replied with a wink that made Asta make a strangled noise. The ash-blonde boy who'd been getting chased earlier stepped forward with a manic grin. "Luck Voltia, you look strong, want to fight? Please say yes, I haven't had a good fight in weeks." "Maybe later," Naruto said diplomatically. "I'd like to settle in first." "Boring," Luck sighed, but his grin didn't fade. The introductions continued in a whirlwind of personalities that was both overwhelming and oddly welcoming. Magna Swing turned out to be the same Earth mage who'd been on his team during the exam, which explained why he was giving Naruto an approving nod. Gauche Adlai barely looked up from a photograph he was obsessing over, while Gordon Agrippa mumbled something that might have been a greeting in a voice so quiet Naruto had to strain to hear it. "And that's Finral," Yami said, gesturing to the passed-out figure at the table. "Our spatial mage and the reason we can actually complete missions despite being based in the middle of nowhere." "Is he always unconscious?" Asta asked worriedly. "Only when he's been rejected by women," Vanessa replied cheerfully, "which is most of the time." "Right," Yami clapped his hands together. "Now that you've met the circus, let's talk business. Normally I'd give you a week to settle in, but we've got a situation that needs handling immediately." The captain's tone shifted from casual to serious, and the room's atmosphere changed with it. Whatever had been bothering Yami wasn't a routine patrol. "There've been reports of magical anomalies near the border town of Rayaka," he continued. "Livestock dying mysteriously, crops withering overnight, and several villagers have gone missing. The local authorities think it's bandits, but the magical signatures don't match any known criminal groups." Naruto felt a familiar chill run down his spine. In his previous life, mysterious disappearances and unexplained phenomena had usually meant one thing. Someone was conducting experiments they didn't want discovered. "What kind of anomalies?" he asked. Yami raised an eyebrow, probably surprised that a brand new recruit was asking tactical questions. "Mana distortions, mainly. Like someone's been using magic way beyond their natural capacity, or combining different magical types in ways that shouldn't be possible." "Forbidden magic research," Naruto said immediately, then paused as everyone stared at him. "I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. If someone's pushing magical boundaries and people are disappearing." "Kid's got a point," Yami said slowly. "Which is why I'm sending a team to investigate. Magna, Luck, you're taking point. And you too," he pointed at Naruto and Asta, "are going with them." "Our first mission," Asta practically vibrated with excitement. "We're really magic knights now. Don't get cocky," Magna warned, though he was grinning. "Real missions aren't like the entrance exam. People can actually die out there." "Then we'll make sure they don't," Naruto said simply. Something in his tone made the room go quiet again. There was a certainty there, a confidence that spoke of experience far beyond his apparent age. "Finral," Yami barked. "Wake up and get these idiots to Rayaka before the trail goes completely cold." The portal Finral created deposited them in a field outside Rayaka just as the sun was beginning to set. The town was smaller than Naruto had expected, maybe a few hundred residents at most, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers were immediately noticed. But even from a distance, he could sense something wrong. The mana in the air felt twisted, like someone had been stirring it with a stick and left the currents all tangled up. "You feel that?" he asked Magna, who was frowning as he surveyed the town. "Yeah, makes my skin crawl." "You? Same." Naruto created a single shadow clone and sent it ahead to scout while the main group approached the town gates. The clone's memories would give him a better sense of what they were walking into. The town guard who met them looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, and a nervous twitch that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "Magic Knights," he breathed with obvious relief. "Thank the spirits. I'm Captain Morris, town guard. Things have been getting worse every day." "Tell us what you've seen," Luck said, his usual manic energy subdued by the serious atmosphere. "Started about 2 weeks ago," Morris explained as he led them through the eerily quiet streets. "Old Henderson's cattle started dying, just dropped dead in the field, no wounds, no disease. Then the Kawatani family's entire wheat crop withered overnight. After that," he paused in front of a small house with boarded-up windows. "The disappearances started, 3 people so far, all taken from their homes at night. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, they're just gone. Naruto's shadow clone returned with its memories, and he had to suppress a grimace. The mana distortions were even worse up close, creating blind spots and dead zones throughout the town. Whatever was happening here, it was systematic and deliberate. Where were the magical anomalies strongest? He asked. Morris pointed toward the hills north of town. Up near the old mine. It's been abandoned for years, but lately we've been seeing lights up there at night. Strange colors, not like any magic I've ever seen. That's our target then, Magna decided. We'll check out the mine, see what we can find. Wait, Naruto said, holding up a hand. If this really is forbidden magic research, we need to be smarter about this. Charging in blindly is how good people get hurt. He pulled out a piece of paper and quickly sketched a rough map based on his clone's reconnaissance. Here's what I'm thinking. Luck and Asta approach from the east. Your speed and anti-magic will let you cause chaos and draw attention. Magna and I come from the west, where the terrain gives us better cover. We coordinate our assault to hit them from multiple angles simultaneously. His teammates stared at the tactical diagram he'd drawn. For someone who'd supposedly never been on a real mission before, his analysis was remarkably thorough. You've done this before, Magna said. It wasn't a question. Something like it, Naruto replied vaguely. The principles are the same: gather intelligence, identify weaknesses, coordinate the attack to maximize effectiveness while minimizing risk to civilians. What civilians? Luck asked. If people are missing, they might already be. Don't. Naruto's voice carried a sharp edge that made everyone look at him. We don't assume anyone's dead until we have proof. The mission is rescue first, apprehension second, punishment third, in that order. There was something in his eyes, a weight that spoke of hard-learned lessons and losses that still hurt. Asta, who had been quiet during the tactical discussion, nodded firmly. Naruto's right, we're magic knights. We protect people even if it's harder than just fighting. Luck's manic grin softened slightly. All right, rescue mission it is. But if we do find bad guys, I get to fight some of them, right? If there are bad guys, you'll get your fight, Naruto promised. Just remember information first. We need to know what we're dealing with before we start throwing magic around. The abandoned mine was definitely occupied, but not by anyone legitimate. Naruto crouched in the underbrush with Magna, watching figures in dark robes move between temporary structures that had been erected near the mine entrance. Magical energy crackled between improvised laboratories, and the stench of corrupted mana hung heavy in the air. Definitely not bandits, Magna whispered. Those are research facilities. And those magical signatures, Naruto's enhanced senses, inherited from his previous life sage training, were picking up disturbing details. They're experimenting on people, living subjects. The confirmation hit him like a physical blow. In his previous life, he'd encountered similar situations, people who treated human lives as disposable resources in pursuit of power. The anger that flared in his chest was familiar and welcome. Some things were unforgivable, regardless of what world you lived in. Movement caught his eye, guards patrolling the perimeter, but their patterns were sloppy and predictable. Whoever was running this operation was confident in their secrecy, which meant they probably hadn't prepared for a coordinated assault by actual magic knights. Signal from Luck and Asta, Magna reported, pointing to a brief flash of lightning from the eastern hills. They're in position. Good. Naruto created 3 shadow clones, keeping his mana signature as low as possible. Send 1 clone to each of our flanking positions, but keep them hidden until the main assault begins. When I give the signal, we hit them from all sides simultaneously. What's the signal? Naruto grinned, and there was something predatory in the expression. Trust me, you'll know it when you see it. He began moving toward the mine entrance, staying low and using every piece of cover available. His clones spread out to their assigned positions, creating a perimeter that would prevent anyone from escaping once the battle began. The first guard never saw him coming. Naruto's hand clamped over the man's mouth while a precisely applied pressure point rendered him unconscious. Not lethal, he'd made that decision years ago in another life, but effective. The guard crumpled silently, and Naruto dragged him into the underbrush. The second and third guards fell the same way, victims of infiltration techniques that had been honed across countless dangerous missions. By the time Naruto reached the mine entrance, he'd neutralized 6 sentries without raising any alarms. Inside the mine, the scene was even worse than he'd feared. Makeshift cages held villagers, including the 3 missing persons, all of whom showed signs of magical experimentation. Tubes and wires connected them to arcane machinery that pulsed with sickly light, apparently designed to harvest and concentrate their mana. "Monsters," he whispered, feeling rage build in his chest like molten metal. A robed figure noticed him and opened his mouth to shout an alarm, but Naruto was already moving. A spiraling mana sphere, reduced in power to avoid collateral damage, caught the man in the chest and sent him flying into a wall hard enough to crack stone. That was the signal. All hell broke loose as Luck and a stab burst through the eastern entrance, while Magna and Naruto's clones attacked from the west. Lightning crackled through the air as Luck engaged multiple enemies simultaneously, his speed making him nearly impossible to target. Ista's anti-magic sword carved through defensive spells like they were made of paper, clearing a path toward the prisoners. "The cages," Naruto shouted over the battle noise. "Free the prisoners first," but their enemies weren't ordinary criminals. These were mages with serious training and forbidden magical knowledge, and they adapted quickly to the assault. One of them raised his hands, and the very air around Naruto began to thicken into solid crystal. Crystal magic, prison of absolute, shadow clone magic. Shattering impact. 5 clones materialized inside the forming crystal prison and punched outward simultaneously, their combined force shattering the technique before it could complete. Naruto rolled clear as crystal shards rained down, then launched himself at the mage responsible. "Who are you people?" the enemy mage snarled, dodging backwards. "Those techniques. That's not normal magic. We're magic knights," Naruto replied, pursuing relentlessly. "And you made the mistake of hurting innocent people." The mage's next attack was desperate, a massive wave of crystal spears that filled the air like a deadly rain. But Naruto had fought enemies who could level mountains. This was nothing compared to what he'd faced in his previous life. Shadow clone magic, perfect defense formation. Dozens of clones materialized in overlapping layers, each one positioned to intercept and destroy the crystal spears before they could reach the prisoners or his teammates. The defensive formation held perfectly, not a single shard making it through. The enemy mage stared in shock. "Impossible. No one has that much mana." "You're right," Naruto said calmly, dismissing his clones. "I don't have that much mana. But I don't need to maintain the clones, I just need them to exist long enough to do their job." The realization hit the mage just before Naruto's final spiraling mana sphere did, sending him crashing into unconsciousness. Around the mine, the battle was winding down. Luck had defeated 3 enemies through sheer speed and enthusiasm. Asta had carved through their magical defenses like they were made of wet paper, and Magna's earth magic had sealed all the escape routes. But Naruto's attention was focused on the prisoners. All 3 villagers were alive, though weak from their ordeal. The magical machinery designed to harvest their mana was complex and sophisticated. This wasn't the work of simple criminals. "This is big," he said to Magna, who was securing the unconscious enemies. "Equipment this advanced, knowledge of forbidden magic techniques, someone with serious resources was backing this operation. Think there are more sites like this? I'd bet on it." Naruto began documenting the magical apparatus with quick sketches, his mind already working on the larger implications. "This feels like a testing ground, somewhere to perfect techniques before implementing them on a larger scale." Asta emerged from the mine's depths, supporting one of the rescued villagers. "Everyone's accounted for," he reported. "They're weak, but they'll be okay with proper medical attention." "Good work," Naruto said and meant it. His friend might lack magical power, but his determination to protect others was absolute. Luck appeared beside them with his characteristic grin, though there was satisfaction rather than manic energy in his expression now. "That was a good fight. Those crystal magic guys were actually pretty strong. Strong enough to hurt innocent people," Magna said grimly. "But not strong enough to get away with it." As they prepared to transport the prisoners and evidence back to town, Naruto found himself thinking about the enemy mage's words. The man had recognized that Naruto's techniques were not normal magic, which suggested either exceptional knowledge or previous exposure to similar abilities. Either way, it meant their mission had been successful but not concluded. Whoever was behind this operation was still out there, and they now knew that the Magic Knights were onto them. "Finral should be able to portal us back to town," Magna said, activating a communication crystal. "Captain Yami's going to want a full report on this. What do we tell him about?" Luck gestured vaguely at the destroyed research equipment and unconscious enemies. "All this," Naruto considered the question. How much of his tactical knowledge and fighting experience should he reveal? Too much would raise uncomfortable questions, but too little might hamper future investigations. We tell him the truth, he said finally, that we found evidence of organized magical experimentation and neutralized the immediate threat. The rest, he shrugged, we'll deal with it as it comes up. The return to Rayaka was triumphant, with the entire town turning out to welcome their rescued neighbors. Captain Morris looked like he might cry with relief, and the families of the missing villagers were openly weeping as they were reunited. But Naruto found himself standing apart from the celebration, his mind already moving ahead to the next challenge. This had been a successful mission, yes, but it was also clearly just the beginning of something larger. You did good out there, a familiar voice said behind him. He turned to find Yami approaching, a cigarette dangling from his lips and an unreadable expression on his face. Just doing my job, Captain. Bullshit. Yami took a long drag from his cigarette, studying Naruto with sharp eyes. I've been a magic knight for a long time, kid. I know the difference between beginner's luck and actual combat experience. That tactical planning, the way you coordinated the assault, the techniques you used. He paused. Where did you really learn to fight like that? Naruto felt his stomach tighten. He'd been dreading this conversation, but he'd also known it was inevitable. His performance during the mission had been too polished, too professional for someone on their first real assignment. I don't know how to answer that, he said honestly. Sometimes I just know things like I've done them before even though I haven't. Reincarnation, Yami's tone was matter-of-fact, like he was asking about the weather. You believe in that? Kid, I've seen enough weird shit in my time as a magic knight that I believe in pretty much everything until proven otherwise. Yami flicked his cigarette butt away and fixed Naruto with a serious look. The question is whether your past life experiences are going to be a problem for this squad. They won't be, Naruto said immediately. Whatever I was before, I'm a Black Bull now. This is my life, these are my comrades. I'm not going anywhere. Something shifted in Yami's expression, approval, maybe, or recognition of genuine commitment. Good answer, the captain said, because based on what I saw today, you've got serious leadership potential. The way you coordinated that assault, protected the civilians, kept your teammates focused on the mission. That's the kind of thinking we need more of in the Magic Knights. He paused, taking another cigarette from his pack. Which is why I'm putting you in charge of training coordination for new missions. Unofficial position for now, but if you keep performing like this, it won't stay unofficial long. Naruto felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the responsibility of leadership, of being trusted with other people's lives. It was a burden he'd carried before in another world and another life, but one he'd accepted willingly then and would accept again now. I won't let you down, Captain. I know you won't. Yami lit his new cigarette and began walking back toward the celebration. Now come on, your squad mates are probably wondering where you disappeared to, and Vanessa's already started telling embarrassing stories about everyone. If you don't get back soon, she'll have invented some for you too. As they rejoined the group, Naruto found himself surrounded by his new comrades, all of them eager to rehash the mission and celebrate their success. Estao was describing his anti-magic sword techniques to anyone who would listen, Luck was trying to convince someone to spar with him, and Magna was already planning their next training session. It felt like family. Chaotic, loud, sometimes dysfunctional family, but family nonetheless. And for the first time since arriving in this world, Naruto felt truly at home. The will of fire burned bright in his chest as he listened to his friends' laughter and watched the genuine happiness on the faces of the people they'd saved. This was why he'd been given a second chance, not for glory or power, but for moments like this. Moments where he could make a real difference in people's lives. As the celebration continued around them, Naruto made a silent promise to himself and to the memory of the life he'd left behind. He would protect this world, these people, this new family he'd found, no matter what it cost him, no matter who tried to stop him. The will of fire would not be extinguished again. Naruto woke up screaming. The sound tore from his throat before he could stop it, raw and primal, echoing off the walls of his small room in the Black Bull's base. For a moment, he was still trapped in the nightmare, watching Sasuke walk away into the darkness, feeling Pain's chakra rod pierce his chest, seeing the faces of everyone he'd failed to save stretching out into an endless accusatory crowd. Then reality crashed back. This room, this bed, this body that was 15 years old instead of 80. The Black Bull's insignia hanging on his wall instead of the Hokage's hat on his desk. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to push away the lingering images. 3 weeks had passed since the mission to Rayaka, and the nightmares were getting worse, not better. Every night brought a new combination of memories from both lives, until he could barely tell which fears belonged to which version of himself. A soft knock on his door made him tense. Naruto. You okay in there? Vanessa's voice, unusually gentle. He must have been loud enough to wake her, which meant he'd probably woken up half the base. Yeah, he called back, his voice still rough from screaming. Just a bad dream. Sorry if I disturbed anyone. Mind if I come in? I've got some tea that might help. He considered refusing, but the truth was he didn't want to be alone with his thoughts right now. Sure, Vanessa slipped through the door carrying 2 steaming mugs, her usual flirtatious demeanor replaced by something more maternal. She was wearing a simple nightgown instead of her usual revealing outfit, and her pink hair was mussed from sleep. Nightmare? She asked, settling into the chair by his desk and offering him one of the mugs. You could say that. Naruto accepted the tea gratefully, inhaling the soothing herbal scent. Thanks. And sorry for waking you up. Don't worry about it, I'm a light sleeper anyway. Vanessa studied his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. Want to talk about it? Not really. He took a sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. It's complicated. Try me. I've got all night and I'm surprisingly good at complicated. Something about her tone made him look at her more closely. There was understanding in her violet eyes, the kind that came from personal experience with things better left unspoken. You have nightmares too, he said, not a question. Most of us do. Vanessa's smile was sad rather than bitter. You don't end up in the Black Bulls if you've got a simple, happy background. We're all running from something, or toward something, or trying to figure out which direction is which. Naruto felt something ease in his chest. He wasn't the only one carrying baggage that felt too heavy to bear alone. What if you remembered a whole different life? He asked carefully. Like completely different world, different people, different everything, but the memories felt just as real as your actual life. Reincarnation? Vanessa didn't sound skeptical, just curious. Maybe, or maybe I'm just going crazy. Crazy's relative in this squad. She took a long sip of her tea, considering, but let's say it's reincarnation. What's the problem? Seems like having 2 lifetimes of experience would be pretty useful. That's just it, Naruto said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. I keep trying to be who I was before, but I'm not that person anymore. Different body, different world, different magic system. But then I try to just be who I am now, and it feels like I'm betraying everyone I left behind. He gestured helplessly, frustrated by his inability to articulate the feeling. I was a leader before, someone people looked up to, someone who could protect an entire village. But here, I'm just a 15-year-old kid who got lucky with his grimoire. What if I'm not strong enough to protect the people who matter? What if I make the same mistakes or new ones that are even worse? Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, just sitting with him in the darkness. Finally, she spoke. You know what I think? I think you're trying too hard to be perfect for everyone else and not hard enough to be yourself. Her voice was gentle but firm. This squad, this life, we don't need you to be some legendary hero from another world. We need you to be Naruto, our squad mate, our friend, the guy who thinks tactically but fights with his heart, the one who refuses to leave people behind even when it would be easier. But what if that's not enough? Then we'll figure it out together. She reached over and placed her hand on his shoulder. That's what families do, right? They stick together through the hard stuff. Family. The word hit him harder than he'd expected, bringing tears to his eyes that he tried to hide by taking another sip of tea. You really think of the Black Bulls as family, don't you? He did. That was the problem. He'd found another family, another group of people to love and protect and worry about losing. The cycle was starting all over again, and he wasn't sure his heart could handle losing everyone a second time. I'm scared, he admitted quietly. I'm scared of caring too much and losing everything again. Good, Vanessa said, surprising him. Fear means you understand what's at stake. It means you won't take stupid risks with the people you love. She stood up, collecting the empty mugs. But don't let fear stop you from living, Naruto. From my experience, running away from happiness just guarantees you'll never find it. After she left, Naruto lay back down but didn't try to sleep. Instead, he stared at the ceiling and tried to reconcile the 2 versions of himself warring in his head. The Hokage who had carried the weight of thousands of lives, and the 15-year-old magic knight who was still figuring out his place in the world. Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe he didn't need to choose between them. Maybe he just needed to learn to be both. The next morning brought new challenges in the form of Yami's announcement that they were getting a new training regimen. Based on recent mission performance, the captain said, somehow managing to look authoritative despite the fact that he was eating breakfast in his underwear, I've decided we need to step up our combat readiness. Naruto's going to be coordinating advanced training exercises for anyone interested in not dying horribly during our next mission. Advanced training? Luck's eyes lit up with manic glee. Does that mean more fighting? Please say it means more fighting. It means learning to work as a team without getting each other killed, Naruto replied, studying the training notes he'd prepared. Solo combat skills are fine, but magic knights operate in squads. We need to be able to coordinate our abilities, cover each other's weaknesses, and adapt when plans go wrong. Sounds boring, Magnus said, though his tone suggested he was interested despite himself. Trust me, it won't be boring. An hour later, half the squad was sprawled on the training ground, exhausted and covered in dirt. The other half was still standing, but barely. Okay, Naruto said, dismissing his shadow clones. That's enough for today. Good work, everyone. Good work, Asta panted from his position flat on his back. You just kicked all our asses simultaneously. That wasn't the point of the exercise, Naruto replied, though he was secretly pleased that his teammates were taking the training seriously. The point was to see how well you could coordinate under pressure. Answer: not very well, but better than expected. He designed the exercise to push them beyond their comfort zones, multiple objectives, shifting priorities, environmental hazards, and his clones playing the role of unpredictable enemies. It was similar to training exercises he remembered from his previous life, adapted for this world's magic system. Your individual skills are impressive, he continued, helping Asta to his feet. But you're thinking like solo fighters, not team members. Luck, your speed is incredible, but you left Magna exposed to flanking attacks 3 times. Magna, your firepower is devastating, but you need to watch your positioning. Friendly fire is still fire. What about me? Finral asked hopefully. Your spatial magic is perfect for battlefield control, but you hesitate too much. Trust your instincts and commit to your portals. Half a second of doubt can get someone killed. The critiques continued as they walked back to the base, each one designed to help his squadmates recognize their own weaknesses and develop solutions. It was the kind of tactical analysis that had made him an effective leader in his previous life, but it was also exhausting in ways he hadn't expected. By the time they reached the building, Naruto was fighting to stay upright. The training session had pushed his mana reserves past their limits, and maintaining that many shadow clones for that long had left him feeling like his magical channels had been scraped raw. I'm going to take a quick break, he said, waving off concerned looks from his squadmates. Just need to recover some mana. But as he climbed the stairs to his room, the world started spinning. His vision blurred, his legs gave out, and the last thing he remembered was Asta's panicked voice calling his name. He woke up in the base's infirmary, with Gordon hovering anxiously nearby and what looked like half the squad crowded around his bed. How long was I out? Naruto asked, his voice coming out as a croak. 6 hours, Vanessa replied, her earlier gentleness replaced by maternal scolding. Gordon says you've got severe mana exhaustion. What the hell were you thinking, pushing yourself that hard? I was thinking about making sure everyone stays alive during our next mission, Naruto replied, struggling to sit up. The training exercise was supposed to what? Asta interrupted, and there was genuine anger in his voice. Kill you, because that's what almost happened. The anger in his friend's tone stopped Naruto cold. He'd seen Asta frustrated, disappointed, even scared, but never genuinely furious. Certainly not at him. Asta, no, don't Asta me. His friend was on his feet now, green eyes blazing. You can't keep doing this. Acting like you have to carry everything by yourself, like the rest of us are too weak to handle our own problems. That's not what isn't it? Asta's voice cracked slightly. Ever since we joined the Magic Knights, you've been pushing yourself harder and harder. Taking on extra responsibilities, training longer than everyone else, acting like you've got to prove something to the world. And now you're pushing yourself so hard you collapse. The room fell silent. Even Luck's usual manic energy had been subdued by Asta's outburst. You want to know what I think? Asta continued, his voice dropping to something more hurt than angry. I think you don't trust us. I think you're so worried about us getting hurt that you're trying to handle everything yourself. But that's not how teams work, Naruto. That's not how friends work. Each word hit like a physical blow. Naruto stared at his friend, seeing his own fears and insecurities reflected in Asta's eyes. You're right, he said quietly. I don't trust you. Gasps echoed around the room, but Naruto continued before anyone could respond. Not because you're weak, he said, his voice gaining strength, but because I'm terrified of losing you, all of you. I've lost people before, important people, people I cared about more than my own life. And the thought of going through that again, he shook his head. It's easier to exhaust myself trying to protect everyone than it is to risk watching someone get hurt because I wasn't strong enough or fast enough or smart enough. The silence that followed was different now, not shocked, but thoughtful. "That's stupid," Asta said finally, though his tone had softened. "You can't protect everyone by doing everything yourself. That's not how it works." "I know that. Logically, I know that. But knowing something and feeling it are different things." Asta pulled up a chair beside the bed, his anger replaced by the same stubborn determination that had carried him through years of being magicless in a magic-obsessed world. "Then we'll help you learn to feel it too," he said simply. "That's what squad mates do, right? We help each other with the hard stuff." "Even when the hard stuff is stupid and self-destructive," Naruto asked with a weak smile. "Especially then," Asta grinned back, the familiar warmth returning to his expression. "Besides, someone's got to keep you from training yourself to death. Might as well be me." Around the room, other heads were nodding in agreement. Vanessa was smiling through what looked suspiciously like tears. Luck was bouncing slightly with renewed energy, and even Gordon had stopped mumbling long enough to give Naruto an encouraging nod. "So here's the deal," Magnus said, crossing his arms. "From now on, training sessions have mandatory rest breaks, and if any of us think you're pushing too hard, we're staging an intervention." What now?" "You heard me. We'll sit on you if we have to. Vanessa's already volunteered to tie you up with her thread magic if necessary." "That would actually be kind of fun," Vanessa added with a wink that made Asta sputter. Despite everything, Naruto found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time since the nightmares had started getting bad. The sound surprised him with its genuine joy. "Okay," he said when the laughter died down. "Deal. But I get to design the intervention procedures. If you're going to stage a coup, you might as well do it tactically." "Only you would turn an intervention into a training exercise," Lux said with delighted approval. "What can I say? I'm consistent." Later that evening, after the others had drifted away to their various activities, Naruto found himself sitting on the base's roof with Asta. They'd done this a lot back in Hage Village, climbing up to watch the stars and talk about their dreams. It felt natural to fall back into the old pattern. "You know what I realized today?" Asta said, leaning back against the roof tiles. "We've all got baggage, even the people who seem like they've got everything figured out. Yami told you about the reincarnation thing. He mentioned you might have some unusual memories. But honestly, I don't care if you used to be the king of another world or just a guy with really weird dreams. You're still the same person who refused to give up on a magicless kid from nowhere." Naruto felt that familiar tightness in his chest, but this time it wasn't painful. It was warm, like coming home after a long journey. "Thanks, Asta, for the intervention, the anger, all of it. I needed to hear that. That's what friends are for, right? Telling you when you're being an idiot. Is that the official definition?" "It is now." Asta grinned, then grew more serious. "But for real, Naruto, you don't have to carry everything alone anymore. We're magic knights now. We're supposed to work together." "I'm still learning how to do that," Naruto admitted. "In my previous life, I spent so much time being responsible for everyone else's safety that I forgot how to let other people be responsible for mine." "Then we'll learn together. Team effort, remember." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead. Naruto found himself thinking about the conversation with Vanessa, about Asta's intervention, about the family he'd found in the most unlikely place. Maybe this was what acceptance looked like. Not forgetting his previous life or pretending it hadn't mattered, but integrating it with who he was becoming. Using the wisdom of his past to build a better future, while still allowing himself to be young and imperfect and surrounded by people who cared about him. "Hey, Asta, yeah. Tomorrow, during training, I want you to help me design the exercises. All of you. I've been thinking about what works for our specific abilities, but you know your own magic better than I do." Asta's grin could have lit up the entire kingdom. "Really? You want us to help plan training? I want us to plan it together. That's different. Better different." "Yeah," Naruto agreed, feeling something settle into place in his chest. "Better different." As they climbed down from the roof and headed inside, Naruto caught sight of his reflection in a window. For the first time since arriving in this world, the face looking back at him didn't seem like a stranger wearing his memories. It was just him, Naruto Uzumaki, Black Bull Magic Knight, 15-year-old with an old soul and a new family. He could live with that. Hell, he could be happy with that. The nightmares might not disappear overnight, and he'd probably always struggle with the urge to carry more than his share of responsibility. But he wasn't facing those challenges alone anymore. And that, he thought as he settled into bed, made all the difference. For the first time in weeks, he fell asleep without fear of what dreams might come. Instead, he dreamed of tomorrow's training session, of laughter echoing across the practice grounds, and of the family he'd found in the most chaotic, wonderful, impossible place. The will of fire burned steady and warm in his chest, no longer a burden to carry alone, but a flame to share with the people he loved. He was home. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of the royal capital as two very different groups of magic knights prepared for their joint mission. On one side stood the Golden Dawn squad, immaculate uniforms, perfect posture, and an air of quiet superiority that seemed to emanate from their very pores. On the other side, the Black Bulls looked like they'd gotten dressed in the dark during an earthquake. Naruto tried not to wince as he watched Magna argue with Luck about proper equipment maintenance, while Finral desperately tried to smooth down his bedhead. Meanwhile, the Golden Dawn members stood in perfect formation, their captain Klaus Lunettes adjusting his glasses as he surveyed the Black Bulls with barely concealed disdain. "This is going to be interesting," Vanessa murmured, appearing beside Naruto with her usual cat-like grace. "That's one word for it," he replied, watching as Yuno approached from the Golden Dawn group. His childhood friend looked every inch the elite magic knight, polished, composed, and completely at ease among the nobility. "Naruto," Yuno said with a slight nod. "I heard about your collapse last week. Are you recovered?" "Good as new," Naruto replied, though he caught the genuine concern in Yuno's golden eyes. Some things never changed, no matter how different their paths had become. "Excellent. We'll need everyone at full strength for this mission." Yuno's expression grew more serious. "Have you been briefed on the target?" "Rogue Magic Knight, possibly experimenting with forbidden power enhancement techniques, last seen in the Witch's Forest region," Naruto recited. "Similar magical signatures to what we found at Rayaka, but stronger." "Much stronger," Klaus interjected, stepping forward with a scroll of mission details. "The magical distortions this individual is creating are affecting wildlife for miles around. Several merchant caravans have reported attacks by creatures that should be hibernating, and there are unconfirmed sightings of monsters exhibiting unnatural magical abilities." Mimosa Vermilion, the Golden Dawn's healer, looked troubled as she studied her own notes. "If someone is successfully enhancing creatures with stolen magical power, the implications are terrifying. We could be looking at an entirely new class of magical threat. Which is why," came a new voice, "both squads will be working together on this mission." Everyone turned to see Captain William Vangeance approaching, his mask catching the morning light. Behind him, Yami ambled along with his usual casual stride, a lit cigarette already dangling from his lips despite the early hour. "Joint operation," Yami announced without preamble. "Golden Dawn handles reconnaissance and magical analysis. Black Bulls provide combat support and tactical coordination. Try not to kill each other before we find the actual enemy." "Tactical coordination?" Klaus's eyebrows rose sharply. "With all due respect, Captain Yami, the Black Bulls are hardly known for their strategic thinking." "You'd be surprised," Yami replied with a grin that was mostly teeth. "Kid here," he jerked his thumb toward Naruto, "has been coordinating some impressive tactical operations lately. Figured it was time to see how he handles inter-squad cooperation." The Golden Dawn members exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their expectations. Naruto felt familiar irritation flare in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced whenever people had dismissed him based on appearances or reputation. "Well then," William said diplomatically, "perhaps we should begin with a strategy meeting. Compare intelligence, coordinate our approaches." What followed was one of the most uncomfortable tactical discussions Naruto had ever experienced. The Golden Dawn members treated every suggestion from the Black Bulls with polite skepticism, while his own squadmates grew increasingly defensive and confrontational. Klaus kept making subtle comments about proper procedure, Magna kept making less subtle comments about stuck-up nobles, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a Staz sword. "The optimal approach," Klaus was saying, adjusting his glasses for the dozenth time, "is a methodical sweep of the affected area, with proper documentation of magical phenomena and careful analysis before engaging the target. We cannot afford to act rashly when dealing with unknown magical threats. Or," Magna interjected with barely restrained irritation, "we could find the bastard and kick his ass before he hurts anyone else." "That attitude is exactly what I'd expect from," Klaus began. "Enough!" Naruto's voice cut across the argument with quiet authority, and both sides fell silent. "This isn't helping anyone." He stood up, moving to the tactical map spread across the table. "Klaus, you're right that we need to be careful about unknown magical threats. Rushing in blind is a good way to get people killed. Magna, you're right that we can't afford to let this continue while we debate methodology. People are already being hurt. Naruto traced his finger across the map, highlighting key locations. So here's what we're going to do. Golden Dawn takes point on the initial sweep. Your detection, magic, and analytical skills are better suited for identifying the source. Black Bulls provides overwatch and rapid response capability. When we locate the target, both squads coordinate the engagement based on what we learned during reconnaissance. That's actually quite reasonable, Mimosa said, sounding surprised. The overwatch positions would need to be coordinated carefully, Klaus added, though his tone had shifted from dismissive to thoughtful. Proper communication protocols, predetermined fallback positions. Already considered, Naruto replied, pulling out a sketch he'd made during the argument. Communication crystals at these intervals, backup positions here and here, emergency extraction routes marked in blue. Klaus stared at the tactical diagram, his expression shifting from skepticism to genuine interest. This is quite sophisticated. Where did you learn operational planning like this? Experience, Naruto said simply, which was true enough. Yuno had been quiet throughout the discussion, but now he spoke up. The coordination will need to be seamless. If the target is as dangerous as the reports suggest, any delay between detection and response could be fatal. Which is why we're going to practice, Naruto announced, earning surprised looks from both squads. Joint training exercise before we deploy. Work out the coordination problems here where mistakes won't get anyone killed. Practice? Klaus looked like he'd tasted something sour. We don't have time for, we make time, Naruto interrupted firmly. Because the alternative is going into a dangerous situation with two squads who have never worked together, and that's how good people die unnecessarily. Captain Vangeance and Yami exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Excellent suggestion, Vangeance said finally. Captain Yami, fine by me. Kid's got a point about coordination. The practice session revealed just how different the two squads really were. The Golden Dawn fought with precision and efficiency, every movement calculated, and every spell deployed with technical perfection. They communicated through subtle gestures and coded phrases, maintaining perfect formation even under pressure. The Black Bulls fought like a natural disaster that had somehow learned tactics. Magna's explosive fire magic carved through obstacles with devastating effectiveness. Luck's lightning-fast assaults created chaos that his teammates exploited ruthlessly. And Finral's spatial magic provided battlefield mobility that was both impressive and completely terrifying to coordinate with. Your squad mates are intense, Mimosa observed, watching Luck bounce off 3 different surfaces while pursuing one of Naruto's shadow clones. They're effective, Naruto replied, tracking the various engagements across the practice field. Different methods, same results. He was running the exercise from a central position, using clones to provide opposition and communication relays to coordinate both squads. It was exhausting work, requiring him to split his attention between multiple tactical situations while monitoring everyone's mana levels and combat effectiveness. But it was also exhilarating. This was the kind of large-scale coordination he'd excelled at in his previous life. The ability to see the bigger picture and adjust strategies in real time based on changing conditions. Yuno, can you create a wind barrier at grid reference 74? He called out through his communication crystal. Magna's about to use an area effect attack and Klaus is in the blast radius. Confirmed, came Yuno's immediate response, and a wall of swirling air materialized just as Magna's fire magic erupted across the practice field. Nice save, Klaus admitted grudgingly through the crystal network. I didn't see the incoming attack. That's what teamwork is for, Naruto replied, already shifting his attention to the next developing situation. Mimosa, can you get a healing spell to Luck? He's pushing too hard and about to crash. Already moving, the Golden Dawn healer confirmed. The exercise continued for another hour, with both squads gradually learning to work with each other's very different styles. By the end, they weren't completely coordinated, but they were functional, and more importantly, they were starting to respect each other's abilities. Well, Klaus said as they gathered for debriefing, I must admit your tactical coordination was surprisingly competent. Gee, thanks, Magna replied dryly, though he was grinning. What Klaus means, Mimosa interjected diplomatically, is that your approach to battlefield management is quite sophisticated. How did you learn to coordinate multiple squad elements like that? Naruto considered how to answer. The truth that he'd commanded armies in another life wasn't exactly something he could share. I pay attention, he said finally. Every person fights differently, thinks differently. The trick is figuring out how to make those differences work together instead of against each other. Like an orchestra, Yuno said thoughtfully. Different instruments, but one piece of music. Exactly. Naruto felt a warm rush of affection for his childhood friend. Even when they were on different squads, Yuno still understood him better than almost anyone. The actual mission began before dawn the next morning, with both squads portal jumping to the edge of the witch's forest. The magical distortions were immediately apparent. Trees grew in impossible spirals, flowers bloomed in colors that hurt to look at, and the very air seemed to shimmer with unstable energy. Detection magic confirms the reports, Klaus announced, his glasses reflecting arcane symbols as he analyzed the ambient mana. Massive power enhancement techniques, definitely artificially induced. The source appears to be approximately 3 kilometers northeast. Creatures? Naruto asked, studying the forest through enhanced senses he'd inherited from his previous life sage training. Multiple contacts, Mimosa reported, her plant magic interfacing with the corrupted forest ecosystem. They're wrong somehow. Predators that should be avoiding each other are hunting in coordinated packs. Herbivores are displaying aggressive behaviors, and their magical signatures, artificially enhanced, Yuno finished grimly. Someone has been experimenting on the local wildlife. As they moved deeper into the forest, the evidence of magical manipulation became more obvious. They passed a clearing where deer with glowing antlers grazed on grass that moved with its own alien intelligence. A family of rabbits watched them pass with eyes that sparked with contained lightning. Even the insects seemed changed, their wings creating tiny light shows as they flew. Beautiful, Vanessa whispered, though there was unease in her voice. And completely unnatural. That's the problem with forced evolution, Naruto said quietly. It looks impressive, but it's usually unstable. These creatures are probably in constant pain. They were approaching the source of the distortions when everything went wrong. The attack came from above, a massive owl with wingspan that blocked out the sun and eyes that burned with stolen fire magic. Its talons, wreathed in wind magic that could cut through steel, dove toward the group with predatory intelligence. Scatter, Naruto commanded, but the creature was too fast, too coordinated. It was going to hit someone, wind magic, towering tornado. Yuno's attack slammed into the owl from the side, deflecting its dive but not stopping it. The creature recovered with impossible grace, banking around for another attack run. It's coordinating with ground forces, Mimosa called out as enhanced wolves began emerging from the underbrush, their fur crackling with lightning magic. The battle that followed was unlike anything Naruto had experienced in this world. The enhanced creatures fought with strategic intelligence, coordinating their attacks and adapting to the squad's tactics in real time. This wasn't random magical experimentation. Someone had been training these creatures as living weapons. Klaus, I need magical analysis on the enhancement patterns, Naruto called out while his shadow clones engaged 3 lightning wolves simultaneously. If we can disrupt the source of their power, working on it, Klaus replied, his detection magic probing the creature's artificial enhancements. The power source is external, some kind of continuous magical feed from that direction. He pointed deeper into the forest, toward a structure that was barely visible through the corrupted trees. That's our target, Naruto decided immediately. Yuno, can you and I punch through their defensive line while the others hold position? Coordinated assault. Yuno's golden eyes were bright with battle excitement. Like when we were kids, but with more explosions, Naruto grinned, feeling the familiar thrill of fighting alongside someone who truly understood his tactical thinking. What happened next was a perfect demonstration of why they'd been rivals for so long. Yuno's wind magic provided precision and control, while Naruto's shadow clones created chaos and misdirection. Together, they carved through the enhanced creature's defenses like they'd been practicing the combination for years instead of improvising it on the spot. Wind magic, Crescent Kametachi. Yuno's attack created a wall of cutting wind that cleared their path. Shadow clone magic, Storm Formation. Naruto's clones surrounded the remaining creatures, attacking from every angle simultaneously. But their real breakthrough came when they began combining their techniques directly. Can you sustain a wind tunnel? Naruto asked as they approached the forest structure. For how long? Yuno replied, already understanding what Naruto had in mind. Long enough for this. Naruto began forming his largest spiraling mana sphere yet, but instead of launching it immediately, he held it steady while Yuno's wind magic began rotating around it. The result was spectacular. The sphere began spinning faster and faster, Yuno's wind magic adding momentum and cutting power to Naruto's concentrated mana. When they finally released it, the combined technique punched through the forest structure's defenses like they were made of paper. Incredible, Klaus breathed, staring at the destruction. I've never seen collaborative magic on that scale. Inside the ruined structure, they found their target, a rogue magic knight named Barrow who had indeed been conducting forbidden power enhancement experiments. His capture was almost anticlimactic after the enhanced creature battle, though his ranting about the perfect fusion of magical power provided disturbing insights into his methods. You have no idea what you're interfering with, Barrow snarled as Magna secured him with earth magic bindings. The enhancement techniques I've developed will revolutionize magical combat. Imagine armies of enhanced soldiers, creatures with the power to suffer constantly from magical instability, Naruto interrupted, studying the experimental equipment scattered around the lab. These enhancement patterns are completely unsustainable. You weren't creating super soldiers, you were creating magical tumors that happen to be mobile. Barrow's expression shifted from fanatical certainty to confusion. That's not. The calculations were perfect. The calculations were flawed from the beginning, Klaus added, reviewing Barrow's research notes. You were assuming magical enhancement worked like mathematical addition, but living creatures don't process mana that way. Every one of these creatures was slowly dying from magical poisoning. The revelation hit Barrow like a physical blow. His entire research program had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how magic interacted with living tissue. The journey back to the royal capital was quiet, both squads processing what they'd experienced. The enhanced creatures had been returned to normal through careful magical intervention, though some would need ongoing treatment for the damage they'd sustained. You know, Mimosa said as they walked, I owe you all an apology. I assumed your squad was less capable than it actually is. We get that a lot, Luck replied cheerfully. Most people think we're just troublemakers. You are troublemakers, Klaus pointed out, but you're also surprisingly effective troublemakers. I'll take it, Magna laughed. Naruto found himself walking beside Yuno, both of them comfortable with the familiar rhythm of moving through terrain together. That combination technique, Yuno said quietly. I've never seen collaborative magic work that seamlessly. It was like we shared the same magical frequency. We've always fought well together, Naruto replied. Different squads don't change that. No, Yuno agreed. They don't. When they reached the capital, both captains were waiting with what looked like preliminary mission reports already prepared. But it was Julius who emerged from the Magic Knight's headquarters, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by intense curiosity. I felt that collaborative technique from here, he said without preamble, his eyes fixed on Naruto and Yuno. The magical resonance was unlike anything I've encountered. How did you achieve that level of synchronization? Naruto paused, trying to find words for something that had felt completely natural. We just understood each other's intentions. Like we were thinking with the same mind. Remarkable, Julius was practically vibrating with scholarly excitement. And the tactical coordination between squads, I'm told it was exemplary. Both squads performed exceptionally, Naruto said quickly. The Golden Dawn's analytical capabilities were crucial for identifying the enhancement patterns, and the Black Bulls provided the combat effectiveness needed to handle the enhanced creatures. Modest as well as competent, Julius observed with amusement. Tell me, Naruto, have you ever considered advanced tactical training, perhaps specialized instruction in inter-squad coordination? Naruto felt everyone's eyes on him, but it was Yami's expression that caught his attention. The captain was watching with something that might have been pride. I'm honored by the suggestion, Wizard King, Naruto replied carefully, but my loyalty is to the Black Bulls. If there's advanced training that would help me serve my squad better, I'm interested, but I'm not looking to transfer. Excellent answer, Julius beamed. Loyalty to one squad is essential. But so is the ability to work effectively with other squads when the kingdom's safety is at stake. I think we can arrange specialized training that serves both purposes. As the groups began to disperse, Naruto caught Yuno's arm. Thanks for today, he said quietly, for trusting my coordination for that combination technique, for treating me like a partner instead of a rival. We're both rivals and partners, Yuno replied with a slight smile. Those aren't mutually exclusive. No, Naruto agreed, feeling something settle into place in his chest. They're not. Walking back to the Black Bull's base with his squad mates, Naruto reflected on what the day had taught him. He could work with other squads without losing his identity as a Black Bull. He could use his tactical knowledge to help people beyond just his immediate team. And most importantly, the bonds he'd formed with people like Yuno didn't have to be weakened by different paths. They could be strengthened by mutual respect and shared purpose. "So," Vanessa said, appearing beside him with her usual cat-like grace, "how does it feel to be the Wizard King's new favorite tactical coordinator?" "Terrifying," Naruto replied honestly. "But also, right somehow. Like this is what I'm supposed to be doing." "Leading people," Asta observed. "You're good at it. Even the Golden Dawn members were following your coordination by the end." "They were following good tactics," Naruto corrected. "Leadership isn't about getting people to follow you, it's about giving them reasons to want to succeed together." "Same thing," Magna said with a grin, "just sounds less scary when you put it that way." As they entered the chaotic warmth of the Black Bull's headquarters, Naruto felt that familiar contentment settle over him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new opportunities to prove himself worthy of the trust people were placing in him. But tonight, he was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by his chosen family, having successfully completed a mission that had pushed all of them beyond their comfort zones. The will of fire burned steady and bright in his chest, no longer a burden to bear alone, but a flame to share with everyone whose lives he touched. He was ready for whatever came next. The first sign that something was changing came during what should have been a routine training session. Naruto stood in the Black Bull's practice yard, sweat dripping from his forehead as he worked through advanced shadow clone formations with Asta and Luck. The morning sun was climbing toward its peak, and the familiar rhythm of training had settled over them like a comfortable blanket. Then Luck said something that made Naruto's blood freeze. "You know what would be really fun? A fight where someone actually got hurt for real, like permanently hurt. That would make it so much more exciting." The words hit Naruto like a physical blow, dragging up memories he'd tried to bury. Images flashed through his mind: Sasuke's curse mark spreading across his skin, Neiji's bloody palm after their Chunin exam fight, the sound of Gaara's bones breaking during their battle in the forest. No, the word came out harsher than he'd intended, carrying an edge that made both his training partners step back. "That's not what fighting is about." "Come on," Luck laughed, apparently oblivious to Naruto's shifting mood. "A little danger makes everything more." "I said no." Naruto's voice cracked like a whip, and something strange happened. The air around him began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. His shadow clones, instead of maintaining their usual solid forms, started flickering between visible and translucent. And most unsettling of all, a faint golden glow began emanating from his skin. "Naruto?" Asta's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you okay? You look." But Naruto wasn't listening. He was lost in a cascade of memories that felt more real than the present moment. Every friend he'd watched suffer, every battle that had gone too far, every time his own power had failed to protect the people he cared about. The emotional weight crashed over him like a tidal wave, and the strange golden energy around him pulsed brighter. "Hey," Magna's voice cut through the haze as he appeared at the edge of the training ground. "What the hell is?" The golden energy exploded outward. For just a moment, everyone in the practice yard was bathed in warm, protective light that felt like sunlight and safety, and someone who would never let you face danger alone. Asta gasped as strength flooded through his muscles, his physical capabilities suddenly enhanced beyond anything he'd experienced. Luck's lightning magic crackled with new intensity, the electrical discharge taking on hints of gold. Even Magna's fire magic seemed to burn hotter and cleaner, as if it had been purified by the strange energy. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished. Naruto collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath, while his enhanced shadow clones flickered out of existence entirely. "What the hell was that?" Magna demanded, rushing to Naruto's side along with the others. "I don't know," Naruto panted, his vision still swimming from the sudden drain on his magical reserves. That's never happened before." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't entirely true. He'd felt something similar before in moments of extreme emotional stress, just never this strong and never affecting other people. "That energy," Asta said quietly, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I felt stronger, like way stronger. What kind of magic was that?" "I don't think it was magic," Luck added, his usual manic enthusiasm replaced by genuine curiosity. "At least not like any magic I know. It felt older, more fundamental." Before Naruto could respond, Yami's voice boomed across the practice yard. "What did you idiots blow up now?" The captain emerged from the base, took one look at the scorch marks and residual energy patterns, and stopped dead. Okay, that's not normal. Naruto, what did you do? I honestly don't know, Captain, Naruto replied, struggling to his feet with Asta's help. I got upset and then. This happened? Yami studied the scene with sharp eyes, taking in the energy residue and the obvious enhancement effects still lingering around the other squad members. After a long moment, he pulled out a communication crystal. Julius. Yeah, it's Yami. I need you to come take a look at something. And bring your research equipment. I think we've got a new magical phenomenon on our hands. The Wizard King arrived within the hour, appearing in the Black Bull's practice yard through one of his time magic portals with what looked like half the magical research department in tow. His usually cheerful demeanor was replaced by intense scientific curiosity as he surveyed the lingering energy patterns. Fascinating, he murmured, various detection spells swirling around his hands as he analyzed the residual magical signatures. The energy pattern is completely unique. Not elemental magic, not enhancement magic, not even traditional mana manipulation. What is it then? Naruto asked, trying to ignore the way Julius's assistants were pointing various arcane instruments at him like he was some kind of laboratory specimen. That's what we're going to find out. Julius turned to him with barely contained excitement. Would you be willing to come to the research department? I'd like to run some more detailed analyses, maybe see if we can reproduce the phenomenon under controlled conditions. Naruto hesitated. The idea of being poked and prodded by magical researchers wasn't exactly appealing, but he was genuinely curious about what had happened, and if this strange energy could somehow help his squadmates. Will it help me understand what's happening to me? I certainly hope so, Julius replied. And more importantly, it might help us understand if this represents a new form of magical expression or something else entirely. The Magic Knight's research facility was everything Naruto had expected and more, a maze of laboratories filled with arcane equipment, floating crystals that hummed with analytical magic, and researchers who looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in months. Please have a seat, Julius said, gesturing to a chair surrounded by more magical detection devices than Naruto had known existed. This won't hurt, I promise. We're just going to monitor your magical patterns while you attempt to reproduce the phenomenon. Attempt to reproduce it how? Naruto asked warily. Well, you mentioned it happened when you became emotionally distressed. Perhaps if we could recreate those emotional conditions. You want me to get upset on purpose? Naruto stared at him. That seems like a really bad idea. Perhaps not upset exactly, Julius said thoughtfully, but certainly focused on whatever emotional state triggered the initial manifestation. What were you feeling precisely when it happened? Naruto closed his eyes, trying to recapture the moment. Protective, I guess. Luck was talking about wanting people to get seriously hurt during fights, and it reminded me of. He paused, not wanting to get into his past life memories. It reminded me of times I'd seen friends get hurt because fighting became more important than people's safety. Protective instincts, Julius nodded, making notes on a floating scroll. That's interesting. Many of the most powerful magical phenomena are tied to fundamental emotional drives. Love, fear, the desire to protect others. As they talked, the detection equipment began registering subtle changes in Naruto's magical signature. Nothing dramatic, but definite shifts in the patterns of energy flowing through his body. There, Julius said excitedly, pointing to one of the readouts. Do you see how your mana isn't just flowing in the normal patterns? It's as if there's a second energy source inside you, something that responds to specific emotional triggers. A second energy source? Naruto felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? I mean, Julius said slowly, his expression growing more serious, that your magical signature suggests you're not just using your own mana. There's something else contributing to your power, something that feels ancient, primal, and definitely not human in origin. The words hit Naruto like a thunderbolt, not human in origin. In his previous life, his power had come partly from Kurama, the nine-tailed fox. Was it possible that some echo of their bond had carried over into this new existence? Can you tell what it is? He asked quietly. Not definitively, Julius admitted, but the energy signature has similarities to some very old magical texts I've encountered. References to summoning magic, bonds between humans and powerful spiritual entities, techniques that were supposedly lost centuries ago. Summoning magic. The parallel was too close to ignore. What if, Naruto said carefully, hypothetically speaking, someone had a connection to a powerful spiritual entity, like a really powerful one? What would that look like? Julius's eyes lit up with scholarly interest. Well, historically, there are records of contracts between humans and various spirits, demons, or other non-physical entities. The human would gain access to the entity's power, while the entity would gain some form of influence in the physical world. He pulled out an ancient-looking tome, its pages yellowed with age. But most of those bonds were temporary or limited in scope. What you're describing, a permanent connection that enhances not just your own abilities but those of people around you, that would require an incredibly powerful entity and an extraordinarily strong bond. Extraordinarily strong, Naruto repeated quietly. The kind of bond that might survive even death itself, Julius added, watching Naruto's reaction carefully. Before Naruto could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the research facility. Emergency crystals flashed red, and Julius's expression shifted instantly from scholarly curiosity to grim alertness. "What's happening?" Naruto asked, jumping to his feet. "Attack on the royal capital," Julius replied, already moving toward the exit. "All magic knights to defensive positions immediately." But as they rushed through the corridors, Julius grabbed Naruto's arm. "That conversation we were having, we're not done with it. Whatever connection you have to that spiritual entity, it's important, more important than you might realize." The attack was coordinated and brutal. Hooded figures had materialized throughout the capital, targeting key infrastructure with surgical precision. But what made it truly terrifying was the creatures fighting alongside them, twisted beings that looked like they'd been assembled from nightmares and malice. Naruto found himself on the western ramparts with several other magic knights, watching in horror as the enemy forces moved through the city below with disturbing coordination. "Those aren't normal summoned creatures," observed one of the other knights, a silver eagle whose detection magic was painting tactical information in the air around them. "The magical signatures are wrong, too complex, too layered. Artificial constructs," Naruto realized, studying the creature's movement patterns. "Like what we found in the forest, but more sophisticated." A new voice cut through their tactical discussion, cold, amused, and definitely hostile. "How perceptive." They spun to find a figure in a white mask standing on the rampart behind them, having appeared without any of them noticing. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, and when he spoke, his voice carried undertones that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "Eye of the Midnight Sun," the silver eagle breathed. "You're not interested in you," the masked figure interrupted, his attention focused entirely on Naruto. "But you're quite interesting indeed." Naruto felt every instinct from his previous life screaming danger. This wasn't just a powerful enemy, this was someone who radiated the kind of malevolent intelligence that turned battlefields into graveyards. "Don't know what you're talking about," Naruto replied, his hand moving instinctively toward his grimoire. "Oh, I think you do." The figure tilted his head, studying Naruto like a particularly fascinating specimen. "That unusual magical signature, those techniques that don't quite fit this world's magical theory, the way power seems to flow through you from." Elsewhere, Naruto's blood turned to ice. This enemy knew something about his true nature. "We've been watching you, you know," the figure continued conversationally. "Ever since that little incident at the Magic Knight exam. Chakra magic, was it? Fascinating terminology for abilities that shouldn't exist in this world." "I don't know what you're talking about," Naruto repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't you?" The masked figure raised his hand, and shadows began coiling around his fingers like living smoke. "Tell me, Naruto Uzumaki, do you dream of orange skies and a village hidden in leaves? Do you remember the weight of a Hokage's hat, or the feeling of chakra flowing through coils that no longer exist?" The words hit like physical blows, each one stripping away another layer of the careful identity he'd built in this world. This enemy didn't just know about his reincarnation, he knew details that should have been impossible for anyone to discover. "How?" Naruto whispered. "There are older magics than most people realize," the figure replied. "Powers that predate the current magical system, techniques for seeing across the boundaries between worlds. You're not the first soul to make the journey, though you may be the most." Intact, before Naruto could process that terrifying implication, the figure's shadows erupted outward in a killing strike. But Naruto's combat instincts, honed across 2 lifetimes, kicked in automatically. Shadow clone magic. Defensive wall, a dozen clones materialized between him and the attack, their combined barriers deflecting the killing blow. But the effort of creating so many clones while already drained from the earlier incident sent spikes of pain through his magical channels. "Impressive," the masked figure said approvingly. "But you're running on empty, aren't you? That little demonstration this morning, combined with the research session, you've pushed your limits too far." He was right. Naruto could feel his mana reserves fluctuating wildly, threatening to give out entirely. One more major technique might be beyond his capabilities. Which means, the figure continued, shadows coiling around him like living armor, this is the perfect time to test your limits. The attack that followed was devastating, not just powerful, but precisely calculated to exploit every weakness in Naruto's current condition. Shadow tendrils wrapped around his clones, dissolving them one by one, while the main assault drove straight toward his chest with lethal intent. Naruto tried to dodge, but his exhausted body moved too slowly. The attack was going to connect, and he didn't have enough mana left to block it effectively. Time seemed to slow as he watched his death approaching. In that crystalline moment, he felt something stir deep inside his soul, not his own power, but something else. Something that had been part of him for so long he'd almost forgotten it was separate. "Hey, partner." The voice was familiar, warm, and impossible. Kurama's voice, speaking from somewhere beyond death itself. "Looks like you could use some help." Kurama, Naruto's mental voice, was stunned. "How are you? Same way you are, Kit. Some bonds don't break just because you change worlds. Now stop asking stupid questions and let me give these bastards a reminder of what real power looks like." The golden energy that erupted from Naruto's body made his earlier incident look like a candle compared to the sun. But this time, instead of being chaotic and uncontrolled, it moved with purpose and intelligence. The shadows attacking him simply ceased to exist, overwhelmed by power that operated on a completely different level than anything in this world. But more than that, the energy reached out to every magic knight in the capital, flowing into them like liquid courage and strength. Wounded knights found their injuries healing, exhausted mages discovered new reserves of power, and even the most inexperienced fighters suddenly moved with coordination and skill that shouldn't have been possible. For just a moment, every magic knight in the royal capital fought with the strength and wisdom of the greatest ninja who had ever lived. The masked figure staggered backward, his shadows dissipating like smoke in a hurricane. "Impossible," he breathed. "That level of spiritual bonding, it shouldn't be sustainable in this reality." "A lot of things shouldn't be possible," Naruto replied, golden energy still flickering around his form. "Doesn't stop them from happening." But even as he spoke, he could feel the power fading. Whatever had just happened, it had pushed him beyond his absolute limits. His vision was already starting to blur, and he could taste blood in his mouth. The masked figure seemed to realize this as well. "Fascinating," he said, his composure returning. "So that's your secret, not just reincarnation, active spiritual bonding across dimensional boundaries. We'll have to study this phenomenon more carefully." "You won't get the chance," Naruto gasped, trying to stay upright despite the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. "Won't I?" The figure's voice carried dark amusement. "Look around you, Naruto Uzumaki. The attack was never meant to succeed, it was meant to force you to reveal your true capabilities, and you've done that magnificently." Horror crept through Naruto's exhaustion as he realized the truth. This hadn't been an assault on the capital, it had been a test. A probe designed specifically to make him demonstrate his unique abilities in front of witnesses. "Now we know what you're capable of," the figure continued, already beginning to fade back into shadows. "And more importantly, we know how to find others like you. Thank you for the demonstration." He vanished completely, leaving Naruto swaying on the rampart with the taste of defeat bitter in his mouth. Around the capital, the enemy forces were already retreating, their mission apparently complete. "Naruto," Astaz's voice echoed across the rampart as he and several other Black Bulls arrived via Finral's portal magic. "Are you okay?" "We felt that energy surge from across the city." "I'm fine," Naruto lied, accepting Astaz's steadying hand. "Just tired." But he wasn't fine. The enemy now knew about his reincarnation, about his connection to Kurama, and worst of all, they were apparently looking for others like him. The implications were terrifying. How many other reincarnated souls were there in this world? And what did the Eye of the Midnight Sun want with them? "That power you used," came Julius's voice as the Wizard King appeared beside them, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. "It wasn't just your own, was it?" "No," Naruto admitted quietly. "It wasn't." "Then we need to talk," Julius said seriously, "because whatever just happened here, it's bigger than just you. And if the enemy is specifically targeting people with your unique circumstances, then we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." As they helped him back toward the base, Naruto found himself thinking about the masked figure's words. Others like him? Other souls who had crossed between worlds, carrying powers and memories that didn't belong in this reality. If they were out there, he needed to find them before the eye of the midnight sun did. Because if the enemy could corrupt or control reincarnated souls with their original powers intact, the thought was too terrifying to complete. "Don't worry so much, Kit," came Kurama's voice in his mind, fainter now but still present. "We've faced worse than this before. Have we?" Naruto asked silently. "Because right now it feels like we're walking into something that could destroy everything I care about. Then we don't let that happen," Kurama replied simply. "Same as always, we protect what matters no matter what it costs us." The familiar determination settled into Naruto's chest like a warm coal. Kurama was right, they'd faced impossible odds before and found a way to win. This world, these people, this new family he'd found, they were worth fighting for. Even if it meant revealing every secret he'd tried to keep hidden. Even if it meant facing enemies who knew exactly who he used to be. The will of fire burned bright in his chest, now strengthened by the knowledge that he wasn't carrying it alone. Kurama was still with him, somehow, and together they would find a way to protect this world he'd come to love. No matter what it cost them, no matter who tried to stop them, the real fight was just beginning. 3 days after the attack on the royal capital, Naruto found himself assigned to what should have been the most boring mission possible. Escorting a merchant caravan through the countryside to deliver supplies to a remote village. It was the kind of routine patrol that usually got assigned to new recruits as punishment duty, which was exactly why he was suspicious. "I still don't understand why they sent us on this," Asta complained from his position atop the lead wagon, his anti-magic sword resting across his knees. "We just helped defend the capital. Shouldn't we be getting more important missions?" "Maybe they think we need to recover," Noel Silva said from her position on the opposite side of the convoy. She'd been assigned to their squad just 2 days earlier, a transfer that had surprised everyone, including Noel herself. Naruto studied the newest member of their team as she rode alongside the wagons with perfect noble posture. The Silver Eagles had supposedly released her due to squad compatibility issues, but he suspected the real reason had more to do with her inability to properly control her water magic. Every spell she cast seemed to go wildly off target, despite the obvious power behind it. It reminded him of someone else who'd once struggled with control. "Recovery missions can be just as dangerous as combat missions," he said, his enhanced senses scanning the forest around them. "Sometimes more so because people let their guard down." "You're paranoid," Magna called from the rear of the convoy, though his tone suggested he didn't entirely disagree. "Paranoid keeps people alive," Naruto replied, pausing as something caught his attention. "Hold up." The convoy ground to a halt as Naruto dismounted and moved toward the forest edge. There, a figure sprawled beside the road, apparently injured and barely conscious. Blood stained his clothes, and he was making weak sounds that might have been calls for help. Every instinct from his previous life was screaming trap. "Help!" the figure gasped as Naruto approached. "Please, bandits, they took everything." "Noel," Naruto called without taking his eyes off the injured man. "Can you create a water barrier around the convoy?" "Just in case, I can try," Noel replied, though her voice carried the uncertainty that seemed to plague all her magic use. As she began casting, Naruto knelt beside the injured traveler, apparently checking his wounds while actually studying him with senses honed across 2 lifetimes of dangerous missions. The man's breathing was wrong, too controlled for someone in genuine distress. His positioning was tactical, giving him clear sightlines to multiple escape routes. And most damning of all, the blood on his clothes was too fresh and too evenly distributed, like it had been applied rather than earned through actual injury. "What happened?" Naruto asked gently, playing along while his mind raced through possibilities. "Bandits," the man gasped, his performance quite convincing. "Dozen of them, maybe more, took our cargo, killed the others. I barely escaped." "That's terrible," Naruto said with apparent sympathy. "Which direction did they go?" The man pointed deeper into the forest, toward a section that would require the convoy to leave the main road and enter terrain perfect for ambushes. "We have to help the other survivors," Asta declared immediately, already climbing down from the wagon. "There are no other survivors," Naruto said quietly, loud enough for his teammates to hear but not the supposed victim. "Are there?" The injured man's eyes sharpened slightly, though he maintained his act. "What do you mean? I told you they killed. They killed people whose blood somehow ended up distributed across your clothes in a pattern consistent with deliberate application rather than combat wounds," Naruto interrupted, his voice taking on the cold edge it had carried during interrogations in his previous life. Your breathing is too controlled for someone in shock. Your positioning gives you tactical advantages that an actual victim wouldn't think about, and most importantly, he paused, letting his enhanced senses confirm what he'd suspected. You smell like the same corrupted mana we encountered during the attack on the capital. The man's facade cracked just slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. Eye of the Midnight Sun, Naruto said simply, and the reaction was immediate. The fake victim's hand moved toward a concealed weapon, but Naruto was already in motion. Years of combat experience compressed into a single fluid movement. Grab the wrist, apply pressure to the nerve cluster, redirect the attack while simultaneously creating a shadow clone to secure the weapon. Nice try, Naruto said as his clone pressed a kunai to the infiltrator's throat. But I've seen this particular performance before. Naruto, Asta called out, finally catching up to what was happening. He's an enemy, he's a scout, Naruto replied, studying the captured man with cold analysis. Sent to evaluate our capabilities and probably lead us into an ambush. The question is what information you were actually supposed to gather. The infiltrator had gone completely still, apparently recognizing that his mission had failed catastrophically. You can't prove anything. Don't need to prove it, Naruto said casually. I just need to decide whether you're more valuable as a source of information or as a message to your employers. Something in his tone made the man pale. There was authority there, the kind that came from someone who'd made similar decisions before and wouldn't hesitate to make them again. Of course, Naruto continued conversationally, I'm not the type to torture information out of prisoners. That's inefficient and unreliable, but I am curious about a few things. He gestured, and more shadow clones materialized around the convoy, taking defensive positions that would make any potential ambush extremely costly for the attackers. For instance, Naruto said, how did you know we'd be taking this route? This mission assignment came through official channels, which means either someone in the Magic Knights is compromised, or you have intelligence gathering capabilities that are frankly impressive. The infiltrator said nothing, but Naruto caught the slight twitch that suggested he'd hit close to the mark. Then there's the timing, he continued. 3 days after an attack that specifically targeted me, we get assigned to a remote patrol mission that conveniently takes us away from the capital's defenses. That's either remarkable coincidence or careful planning. You're overthinking this, the man said, though his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Naruto knelt down so he was eye level with the captured spy. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like someone is very interested in testing my capabilities away from witnesses, which raises the interesting question of what they learned during our last encounter. The infiltrator's composure cracked slightly. You have no idea what forces you're dealing with. Enlighten me. The Eye of the Midnight Sun has resources you can't imagine. Connections throughout the kingdom, access to magics that predate your current system, knowledge that spans multiple worlds and realities. The man's voice took on a fanatical edge. What happened in the capital was just a demonstration. The real work is already beginning. What real work? But the infiltrator had apparently said more than he'd intended. His expression shifted from fanatical certainty to something approaching panic, as if he'd just realized he'd revealed information he wasn't supposed to share. I've said too much, he whispered. Not nearly enough, Naruto replied grimly. What did you mean by multiple worlds and realities? What does the Eye of the Midnight Sun know about reincarnation? The word hit the infiltrator like a physical blow. His eyes widened with what looked like genuine fear, not of Naruto, but of his own organization. They know, he breathed. They know everything. About you, about the others, about the places you came from and the powers you brought with you. Others. There it was again, confirmation that Naruto wasn't the only reincarnated soul in this world. What others? Naruto demanded. How many? Where are they? But before the infiltrator could respond, his body convulsed. Dark energy erupted from his skin like black lightning, and when it faded, the man was dead. Not from external injury, but from some kind of magical seal that had activated when he'd revealed too much information. Damn, Naruto muttered, checking for any signs of life and finding none. Suicide curse, should have expected that. He's dead, Noel asked, her water barrier finally stabilizing around the convoy. Very dead, Naruto confirmed, already thinking through the implications. Which means this conversation was never supposed to happen. He was meant to either succeed in his scouting mission or die trying, not get captured and interrogated. So what do we do now? Magna asked, studying the forest around them with new wariness. Now we assume the ambush is still out there and proceed accordingly, Naruto replied, his tactical mind already shifting into combat mode. They sent a scout to evaluate our capabilities and lead us into a trap. The scout failed, but that doesn't mean they'll give up on the trap itself. He created additional shadow clones and sent them ranging through the forest in search patterns that would reveal any waiting enemies. The feedback he received confirmed his suspicions: multiple hostile contacts, positioned in classic ambush formations along what would have been their route if they'd followed the infiltrators' directions. 12 enemies, he reported to his teammates. Maybe more, positioned for a coordinated assault using the terrain to their advantage. They're expecting us to come to them. So we don't, Asta said immediately, his hand moving to his sword. We make them come to us. Better idea, Naruto said with a grin that carried more teeth than humor. We go around them, complete our mission, and then come back to clean up the ambush from a direction they're not expecting. That's actually pretty clever, Noel admitted, though she still looked nervous about the prospect of actual combat. It's also risky, Magna pointed out. If we leave enemies behind us, they could attack the convoy while we're distracted. Not if they don't know where the convoy is, Naruto replied, his grin widening. Finral taught me a few things about misdirection during our joint training sessions. What followed was a masterclass in tactical deception that drew on everything Naruto had learned across 2 lifetimes of dangerous missions. Using shadow clones to create false convoy movements, environmental manipulation to obscure their actual route, and careful timing to ensure the ambush force remained focused on empty forest while the real convoy moved safely through alternate paths. By the time they reached their destination, a small village that genuinely needed the medical supplies they were carrying, the ambush force was still waiting in the woods for targets that would never arrive. That was brilliant, Noel said as they unloaded the wagons, her earlier nervousness replaced by something approaching admiration. How did you know they wouldn't follow us? Because they're thinking like hunters instead of soldiers, Naruto explained, checking his clone network to confirm the enemy positions. Hunters wait for prey to come to them, soldiers adapt when the situation changes. These guys are hunters. So what now? Asta asked. We still need to deal with them, right? Oh, absolutely, Naruto agreed. But now we have advantages they don't expect. They're positioned for an ambush that isn't coming, they've been waiting in the same positions for hours, and most importantly, they don't know we're aware of their existence. The assault Naruto planned was surgical in its precision. Using intelligence gathered through his clone network, they approached the ambush positions from multiple directions simultaneously, catching enemies who had been focused on empty forest for so long they'd grown complacent. But what impressed his teammates most wasn't the tactical coordination, it was the way Naruto handled the actual combat. Spiraling Mana Sphere, he launched his adapted Rasengan not at an enemy, but at a tree positioned between 2 ambush points. The technique didn't just destroy the tree, it created a cascade of falling timber that forced the enemies to abandon their concealed positions and move into the open. Shadow clone magic. Herding formation. Dozens of clones materialized throughout the forest, not to attack directly, but to control the enemy's movement options, forcing them into predetermined kill zones where Asta's anti-magic and Magna's fire magic could be most effective. Water magic, Sea Dragon's Roar. Noel's spell, finally cast with confidence instead of uncertainty, created a massive torrent that swept 3 enemies off their feet and into Magna's waiting fire attacks. The battle was over in minutes, with all 12 ambush members captured alive and secured with earth magic bindings that would hold until proper authorities could take custody. How did you know exactly where they'd move when you destroyed the tree? Noel asked as they surveyed their prisoners. People are predictable when they're scared, Naruto replied, though the real answer was more complex. He'd learned to read battlefield psychology during a war where the wrong guess could cost the lives of entire squads. Push them in the right direction, and they'll usually go where you want them to go. That's not normal tactical thinking, Magna observed. Where did you learn to fight like that? Before Naruto could answer, one of the captured enemies spoke up. Unlike the infiltrator, this one seemed more soldier than fanatic, and his tone carried grudging respect rather than religious fervor. You're him, aren't you? The man said, studying Naruto with sharp eyes. The one they're all talking about, the magic knight with techniques that don't fit any known magical theory. Who's talking? Naruto asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Everyone who matters in the underground magical community, the soldier replied. Word is there's a kid with a 4-leaf grimoire who can do things that shouldn't be possible. Solid clones that think independently, energy attacks with power signatures that don't match any elemental magic, tactical coordination that makes veteran captains look like amateurs. The soldier paused, his expression growing more serious. They say you fight like someone with decades of experience packed into a teenage body. They say you think 3 moves ahead of everyone else. And they say, his voice dropped to nearly a whisper, that your power comes from somewhere else. Somewhere that isn't part of this world. Silence fell over the group as the implications settled in. Naruto's unique abilities weren't just attracting attention from the eye of the Midnight Sun, they were becoming common knowledge in the criminal underworld. What does that mean for us? Asta asked quietly. It means, Naruto said grimly, that every enemy organization in the kingdom now knows I exist and is probably planning accordingly. The element of surprise is gone, but that's not necessarily bad, right? Noel asked hopefully. I mean, if they know about your abilities, they also know not to underestimate you. Or, Magna said darkly, they know exactly what kind of resources they need to bring to take you down. The captured soldier nodded approvingly. Smart man, the word is already out. Anyone who wants to make a name for themselves in the magical underworld needs to be the one who brings down the mysterious Black Bull with impossible techniques. Great, Naruto muttered. I've got a target painted on my back. Not just you, the soldier continued. Your squad mates too. Standard criminal logic. If you can't get the primary target directly, you go after the people they care about. The threat sent cold fury racing through Naruto's chest. In his previous life, enemies who targeted his friends and family had learned why that was a fatal mistake. But this world operated under different rules, with different power structures and different consequences for stepping over certain lines. Then I guess, he said quietly, we'll have to make sure everyone understands what happens to people who threaten my family. Something in his tone made all the captured soldiers look at him more closely. There was authority there, but more than that, there was the absolute certainty of someone who'd faced impossible odds before and found ways to win. You're not just a reincarnated soul, are you? One of the prisoners asked quietly. You're someone specific, someone important from wherever you came from. Naruto considered how to answer that. The truth was too complex and too dangerous to share, but a partial truth might serve his purposes. I was a protector, he said finally. Someone whose job was to keep people safe, no matter what it cost. That hasn't changed just because I'm in a different world. The finality in his voice seemed to settle the matter for everyone present. Whatever else Naruto might be, he was clearly someone who took threats to his people very personally. As they prepared to transport their prisoners back to the capital, Naruto found himself thinking about the intelligence they'd gathered. The Eye of the Midnight Sun knew about reincarnation, had access to multiple worlds and realities, and was specifically seeking out people like him. But they'd also made a crucial mistake. By targeting him directly, they'd revealed their interest and given him information he could use. The game was no longer one-sided. Hey, Naruto, Asta said as they loaded the prisoners onto the convoy wagons. That thing the guy said about others like you, do you think there really are other reincarnated people out there? Probably, Naruto replied honestly. The question is whether we find them first or whether our enemies do. Then we better find them first, Noel said with unexpected determination. Because if they're anything like you, they're probably trying to protect people too, and if the Eye of the Midnight Sun is targeting them, they'll need help, Magna finished. Just like we'd want help if someone was hunting us. Looking at his teammates, his family, Naruto felt that familiar warmth spread through his chest. They were right. If there were other reincarnated souls in this world, they were probably struggling with the same questions he'd faced. Questions about identity, about belonging, about how to use power from another life without losing themselves in the process. And if enemies were hunting them specifically because of their unique abilities, then those people needed allies who understood what they were going through. All right then, Naruto said, his voice carrying new resolve. First, we get these prisoners back to the capital and find out what the Magic Knight's intelligence division can learn from them. Then we start looking for others like me. A reincarnation rescue mission? Asta grinned. I like it. It's going to be dangerous, Naruto warned. If the Eye of the Midnight Sun is actively hunting these people, then we'll be putting ourselves directly in their path. Good, Noel said with surprising fierceness. Maybe it's time someone hunted them back. As they began the journey back to the royal capital, Naruto reflected on how much had changed since his arrival in this world. He'd found a family, discovered that his connection to Kurama had somehow survived his reincarnation, and learned that he wasn't alone in being displaced from another reality. But most importantly, he'd found a purpose that felt worthy of the power he'd been given. Protecting this world, these people, and anyone else who needed help, that was what the Will of Fire had always been about. And if that meant taking on an organization that could manipulate reality itself, well, he'd faced worse odds before. The prisoners they were transporting would provide intelligence about enemy operations. The knowledge that other reincarnated souls existed would guide their search efforts. And the warning about criminal organizations targeting him would help them prepare for future attacks. All in all, it had been a very productive mission. Even if it had started with the most obvious trap in the history of espionage. "You're enjoying this," came Kurama's amused voice in his mind. Maybe a little, Naruto admitted silently. "It feels good to be useful again. Just don't get overconfident, Kit. These enemies know more about what you are than most of your allies do. That makes them dangerous in ways you haven't encountered yet." "Then we'll learn to be dangerous right back," Naruto replied with grim satisfaction. The Will of Fire burned bright in his chest, no longer just a personal flame, but a beacon that would guide others to safety. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready for them. After all, he'd always been at his best when the odds seemed impossible. Some things never changed, no matter which world he was in. The argument started over something stupid. Naruto was reviewing intelligence reports in the Black Bull's common room when Yuno arrived through one of Finral's portals. His Golden Dawn robes pristine despite having just returned from what was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance mission. The contrast between his composed appearance and the exhaustion radiating from Naruto's own squad, who'd spent the last week dealing with the fallout from their captured prisoners, was impossible to ignore. "You look like hell," Yuno observed, settling into the chair across from Naruto with his usual perfect posture. "Thanks for the pep talk," Naruto replied dryly, not looking up from the stack of documents he was reviewing. "How did your mission go?" "Successfully. No complications, no unexpected encounters, no dramatic revelations about shadow organizations or reincarnated souls." There was something in Yuno's tone that made Naruto finally look up. His childhood friend was studying him with an expression that was carefully neutral, but Naruto knew him well enough to recognize the frustration underneath. "Something bothering you? Should there be?" Naruto set down his reports, recognizing the signs of an impending confrontation. "Just say what you want to say, Yuno." "Fine." Yuno leaned forward slightly, his golden eyes intense. "What happened to you? What do you mean? 6 months ago, you were just another kid from Hage Village with unusual magic and big dreams. Now you're coordinating tactical operations that impress Magic Knight captains, demonstrating abilities that don't match any known magical theory, and apparently attracting the attention of terrorist organizations who know things about your past that even I don't." Yuno's voice remained level, but there was an edge to it that Naruto hadn't heard since they were children competing over everything from who could climb trees faster to who could eat more bowls of ramen. "You're saying I've changed," Naruto said carefully. "I'm saying you've become someone I don't recognize." Yuno stood up, beginning to pace with uncharacteristic agitation. "The Naruto I grew up with was impulsive, loud, and wore his heart on his sleeve. This version plans 3 moves ahead, speaks with authority that shouldn't exist in a 15-year-old, and carries himself like someone who's been responsible for other people's lives for decades." Each word hit like a physical blow. Naruto had been so careful to maintain his cover, to seem like just another talented magic knight with an unusual background, but apparently not careful enough to fool someone who'd known him since childhood. "Maybe I just grew up," he said quietly. "Grew up?" Yuno's laugh was bitter. "People don't grow up overnight, Naruto. They don't suddenly develop tactical brilliance and combat instincts that would make veteran captains jealous. They don't start demonstrating magical techniques that experts claim shouldn't be possible." "What are you trying to say?" Yuno stopped pacing and fixed him with a stare that seemed to see straight through every carefully constructed layer of his new identity. "I'm saying that either you've been lying to me our entire lives about who you really are, or something happened to you that you're not telling me about. And either way, I'm tired of feeling like I'm talking to a stranger wearing my best friend's face." The accusation hung in the air between them like a drawn blade. Naruto felt his chest tighten with the familiar panic that came whenever someone got too close to the truth about his reincarnation. "You want the truth," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Fine, you're right. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. I have memories that don't belong to this life, abilities that come from experiences I shouldn't possess, and knowledge that I acquired in ways I can't explain to anyone, including you." Yuno's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. But you know what hasn't changed, Naruto continued, rising to his feet as well. The fact that I care about the people in this village, in this kingdom, in this world. The fact that I'd do anything to protect them, including you. So if that makes me a stranger, then maybe you didn't know me as well as you thought you did. That's not what I meant, isn't it? Naruto's voice cracked slightly. Because it sounds like you're questioning whether I belong here at all, whether these memories and abilities make me too different, too dangerous, too foreign to be trusted. The words echoed with pain from another life, another conversation with another friend who'd looked at him like he was something alien and threatening. Sasuke's voice from a lifetime ago, you'll never understand what it's like to lose everything. You've always had people who cared about you, but Yuno wasn't Sasuke, and this wasn't that conversation. The parallel was unfair, and Naruto knew it even as the emotional wound it touched felt just as raw. That's not what I'm saying, Yuno said quietly, his earlier anger replaced by something that might have been hurt. I'm saying that you've been carrying whatever this burden is alone, and it's changing you in ways that worry me. Worry you how? You don't trust us anymore. The words came out in a rush, as if Yuno had been holding them back for weeks. You plan missions like you're the only person competent enough to handle them. You take risks with your own safety because you're so focused on protecting everyone else that you forget you're part of the team too. And whenever anyone asks about your abilities or your knowledge, you deflect like you're protecting state secrets. Naruto opened his mouth to argue, then closed it as the truth of the accusation hit home. He had been holding himself apart, hadn't he? Treating his squadmates like they were people to be protected rather than partners to be trusted. Maybe I don't trust you to handle the truth, he said, the words coming out harsher than he'd intended. Yuno recoiled as if he'd been slapped. What's that supposed to mean? It means that the truth about what I am, about where my abilities come from, about what I've seen and done, it's not something most people can handle. And the last thing I want is to burden you with knowledge that could put you in danger or change the way you look at me. So you'd rather lie to me instead. I'd rather protect you. From what? From the same thing that happened to Naruto cut himself off, realizing he'd been about to reference someone from his previous life that Yuno couldn't possibly know about. But Yuno caught the slip anyway. From the same thing that happened to Naruto, who are you thinking about when you look at me like I'm about to disappear? The question hit too close to home. Naruto felt his carefully maintained composure crack, and for a moment, the weight of 2 lifetimes of loss threatened to overwhelm him. Someone who mattered to me, he said quietly. Someone I couldn't save, couldn't reach, couldn't convince to trust me when it mattered most. Someone who walked away because he thought he had to carry his burdens alone. Understanding flickered in Yuno's golden eyes. And you think I'm going to do the same thing? I think that if you really knew what I am, what I've done, what I'm capable of when I stop holding back, you might decide that the person you grew up with doesn't exist anymore. And you'd be right. Yuno was quiet for a long moment, processing what Naruto had revealed. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler but no less direct. Do you want to know what I think? Not particularly. I think you're so afraid of losing people that you're pushing them away before they can leave on their own. I think you're using your mysterious past as an excuse to avoid trusting anyone with who you really are now. And I think, Yuno's voice grew firmer, that you're underestimating the people who care about you. Am I? Naruto challenged. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my mysterious abilities and foreign knowledge are exactly what's bothering you about our friendship. No, Yuno said firmly. What bothers me is that you think I'm so shallow that I'd abandon you over something like that. What bothers me is that after growing up together, after everything we've been through, you apparently believe I'd choose to stay ignorant rather than help you carry whatever burden you're shouldering. The words hit like a physical blow, mostly because they were true. Naruto had been protecting Yuno from the truth not because Yuno couldn't handle it, but because Naruto couldn't handle the possibility of losing another person who mattered to him. I've lost people before, he said quietly. Important people, people I loved like family, and every time it started with secrets and ended with them walking away because they thought they knew what was best for everyone. Then don't repeat their mistakes, Yuno replied simply. Trust me enough to let me make my own decisions about whether your truth is something I can handle. Before Naruto could respond, Finral burst through the door with panic written across his face. Emergency portal request from the Golden Dawn, he announced breathlessly. Captain Vangeance needs immediate backup for a reconnaissance mission gone wrong. Both boys turned toward him, their argument forgotten in the face of immediate crisis. What kind of reconnaissance mission? Yuno demanded, his composure shifting instantly from personal to professional. The kind where someone didn't come back when they were supposed to, Finral replied grimly. And the kind where the magical disturbance they were investigating just got a lot stronger. Yuno was already moving toward his grimoire, but Naruto caught his arm. Wait, what reconnaissance mission? You just got back from one. Different mission, Yuno said, shaking off Naruto's grip. Klaus and Mimosa were investigating reports of unusual magical phenomena near the border. They were supposed to report back 2 hours ago. And you're planning to go after them alone? It's a Golden Dawn matter. It's a suicide mission, Naruto interrupted, his tactical mind already analyzing the situation. If Klaus and Mimosa ran into something they couldn't handle, then charging in alone isn't bravery, it's stupidity. Yuno's eyes flashed with anger. So now you don't trust me to handle my own squad's problems. I don't trust anyone to handle unknown magical threats without backup and proper reconnaissance, Naruto shot back. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're so determined to prove your independence that you're willing to take unnecessary risks. And you're so determined to control every situation that you can't let anyone else take point on their own missions. They were back to arguing, their unresolved confrontation bleeding into the tactical disagreement. Finral looked back and forth between them like he was watching a particularly volatile magical experiment. Guys, he said tentatively, people are missing. Maybe we could argue about trust issues after we make sure they're not dead. The comment broke through their mutual anger, reminding both of them what was actually at stake. Yuno's expression shifted from frustrated to determined. You're right, he said to Finral. Portal me to the last known position. I'll assess the situation and we'll assess the situation, Naruto corrected, already calling for his grimoire. This isn't a Golden Dawn matter anymore. It's a missing persons case involving potential magical threats. That makes it everyone's problem. I don't need your help. Yes, you do. Naruto's voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who'd learned hard lessons about the cost of prideful independence. And more importantly, Klaus and Mimosa need all the help they can get. So we can either work together, or we can waste time arguing while they're in danger. Yuno stared at him for a moment, clearly struggling between his desire to handle the crisis independently and his recognition that Naruto was making tactical sense. Fine, he said finally, but I'm taking point. It's my squad mates who are missing. Agreed, but we do this smart, reconnaissance first, then coordinated assault if necessary. No charging in alone, no matter what we find. Agreed. Finral opened a portal to the border region, and both boys stepped through into what immediately revealed itself to be a much more serious situation than anyone had anticipated. The magical disturbance was visible from miles away, a swirling vortex of energy that seemed to bend the very air around it. Trees within a half-mile radius were withered and dead, their life force apparently drained to feed whatever was creating the phenomenon. And at the center of it all, barely visible through the energy distortions, were two figures suspended in midair by what looked like crystalline restraints. Klaus and Mimosa, Yuno breathed, his earlier composure cracking into obvious worry. Alive, Naruto confirmed, his enhanced senses picking up their life signs despite the magical interference. But not for long if we don't get them out of there. He created a dozen shadow clones and sent them ranging around the perimeter of the disturbance, gathering intelligence about the magical phenomenon and looking for whoever might be controlling it. Artificial construct, he reported after processing the feedback from his scouts. Someone's created a mana-draining field using your squad mates as focusing points. The longer they're trapped, the more of their life force gets converted into raw magical energy. For what purpose? Based on the energy patterns. Naruto paused as the implications hit him. Someone's trying to create a permanent portal, the kind that could allow large-scale transportation between distant locations or even between different planes of existence. Yuno's face went pale. The eye of the midnight sun has to be. This is exactly the kind of technique that would require enormous amounts of concentrated life force. Naruto's expression hardened. They're using your friends as batteries. The tactical situation was nightmarish. The energy field made direct approach impossible. Anything that got too close would be drained of life just like the surrounding forest. But the magical distortions made ranged attacks equally useless. Since spells cast from outside, the field would be absorbed and redirected before they could reach their targets. There's no way in, Yuno said, studying the barrier with growing desperation. Any approach vector I can think of results in us getting caught in the same trap. There's always a way in, Naruto replied, his mind racing through possibilities. The question is whether we're willing to pay the price for it. What do you mean? Naruto was quiet for a moment, calculating risks and resources. Then he turned to Yuno with an expression that was both grim and determined. I can get us inside the barrier, but it's going to require trusting me completely. And I mean completely, no questions, no second guessing, no matter how crazy my plan seems. What kind of plan? The kind that involves me using abilities I've been holding back because they're too dangerous to use around allies. Naruto's voice carried the weight of hard decisions made in desperate circumstances. If I'm wrong about this, we'll all end up as fuel for their portal. If I'm right, we might just save your squad mates and shut down whatever the Eye of the Midnight Sun is planning. Yuno stared at him, clearly wrestling with the implications of what Naruto was asking. This is what you were talking about, isn't it? He said quietly. The abilities that make you different, the knowledge that you're afraid will change how people see you. Part of it, yeah. And you're willing to reveal it to save Klaus and Mimosa. I'm willing to reveal it to save anyone who matters to someone I care about, Naruto replied simply. That includes your squad mates. The statement hung between them for a moment, carrying more weight than just tactical considerations. This was trust, offered freely despite their earlier argument. This was Naruto choosing to be vulnerable in order to protect people who mattered to Yuno. What do you need me to do? Yuno asked. I need you to trust that whatever you see me do in there, I'm still the same person you grew up with. I need you to follow my lead even if my orders don't make tactical sense from your perspective. And most importantly, Naruto's voice grew serious, I need you to be ready to catch me when this is over because I'm probably going to collapse from mana exhaustion. That's it, Yuno nodded slowly. Then let's go save my squad mates. What followed was unlike anything Yuno had ever witnessed. Instead of trying to break through the energy barrier, Naruto walked directly into it, but not as himself. Golden energy erupted from his body, forming a cloak of power that seemed to exist on a completely different level than normal magic. The life-draining field that had withered an entire forest simply parted around him, unable to affect energy that operated according to rules it didn't understand. Sage mode, Naruto said quietly, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated with the natural world itself. Don't ask me to explain it because I can't. Just stay close and try not to think too hard about how this is possible. The enhanced awareness that came with Sage Mode revealed the true scope of what they were facing. The portal wasn't just designed for transportation, it was a summoning circle, intended to bring something through from another realm of existence. Something powerful, malevolent, and definitely not native to this world. We need to move fast, Naruto said, creating shadow clones that somehow maintain their integrity despite the hostile magical environment. They're almost finished with whatever they're trying to summon. Getting Klaus and Mimosa free required precise timing and perfect coordination. Naruto's clones provided distraction, while his Sage Mode enhanced senses identified the exact points where the crystalline restraints were anchored to the magical circle. Yuno's wind magic, enhanced by proximity to Naruto's unusual energy field, cut through bonds that should have been unbreakable. But freeing the prisoners was only the first step. The real challenge was stopping the summoning before it could complete. The control nodes are there, and there, Naruto said, pointing to 3 points around the circle where robed figures were channeling energy into the portal. We need to disrupt all 3 simultaneously, or the backup systems will compensate. 3 targets, 2 of us, Yuno observed. How do we leave that to me? What happened next redefined Yuno's understanding of what his childhood friend was capable of. Naruto didn't just create more shadow clones. He created an army of them, each one moving with tactical precision that spoke of experience in large-scale combat operations. But more than that, he began coordinating their attacks with a level of strategic brilliance that transformed what should have been a chaotic melee into a masterpiece of battlefield control. Wind magic support on the eastern node, he called to Yuno while simultaneously directing clone formations against the other control points. I need you to create a cutting wind that can slice through crystalline magical focuses on my mark. How do you know what kind of focuses they're using? Experience with similar techniques, Naruto replied grimly. Mark, Yuno's wind magic, perfectly timed and positioned, severed the eastern control node's connection to the portal, just as Naruto's coordinated clone assault overwhelmed the other 2 points. The summoning circle collapsed in on itself, the accumulated energy dissipating harmlessly into the atmosphere instead of tearing open a hole between dimensions. The enemy mages, deprived of their power source and facing an opponent whose abilities they couldn't counter, retreated through spatial magic before they could be captured. But they'd left behind enough evidence to confirm what Naruto had suspected. This was part of a larger operation, one designed to bring reinforcements from whatever realm the Eye of the Midnight Sun was connected to. Interdimensional summoning, he said as the Sage Mode energy faded, leaving him swaying on his feet from exhaustion. They're not just planning to conquer this world, they're planning to bring an army from somewhere else to help them do it. Yuno caught him as promised, supporting his weight while Klaus and Mimosa recovered from their ordeal. That power you just used, Yuno said quietly, it wasn't magic, was it? No, Naruto replied honestly, it was something else, something from the life I lived before this one. The reincarnation thing Julius mentioned. Yeah. Yuno was quiet for a moment, processing what he'd witnessed. Then he spoke again, his voice carrying none of the earlier tension or doubt. You know what I realized while watching you coordinate that assault? What? You weren't thinking 3 moves ahead because you're trying to control everything. You were thinking 3 moves ahead because you've been in situations where people died if you didn't. Yuno's voice grew softer. How many battles have you fought, Naruto? In your previous life, I mean. Too many, Naruto replied quietly. Way too many. And how many people were you responsible for? An entire village. Eventually, an entire alliance of villages. The admission hung between them as they helped Klaus and Mimosa to their feet and prepared to return to the capital. Yuno didn't ask for more details, but the understanding in his eyes suggested he didn't need them. That's why you carry yourself like a leader, he said finally. That's why you plan like someone who's responsible for other people's lives. That's why you're so afraid of trusting anyone else with important decisions. That's part of it. And that's why you were so worried about telling me the truth. Because in your previous life, someone you cared about couldn't handle the weight of what you were. Naruto nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. Well, Yuno said with a slight smile, I'm not him. I'm not going to walk away because you have more experience than someone your apparent age should possess. I'm not going to abandon you because your power comes from somewhere else. And I'm definitely not going to let you face whatever's coming alone. Even though I'm not really the person you grew up with, you are exactly the person I grew up with, Yuno replied firmly. You're just also someone else as well. And honestly, after seeing what you're capable of when you stop holding back, I'm grateful you're on our side. As Finral's portal carried them back to the royal capital, Naruto felt something settle in his chest that had been tense since their argument began. This was what he'd been afraid of losing, this acceptance, this understanding, this bond with someone who knew him well enough to see past the surface strangeness to the person underneath. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not walking away, for trusting me even when I couldn't explain what I was asking you to trust, for catching me when I fell. That's what partners do, Yuno replied simply. They catch each other. The word settled between them with quiet significance. Not rivals, not just friends, but partners. People who could trust each other with their lives, their secrets, and their fears. It was exactly what Naruto had needed to hear. And as they began planning their response to the Eye of the Midnight Sun's interdimensional summoning project, he realized that perhaps the most important battle he'd won today wasn't against enemy mages or hostile magical constructs. It was against his own fear of being truly known by someone who mattered to him. The will of fire burned bright in his chest, no longer a solitary flame, but one that had been joined by another. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he wouldn't be facing them alone. Some bonds, he thought with quiet satisfaction, were strong enough to survive even the truth. The attack began at dawn, when the royal capital was caught between the dying darkness of night and the first pale light of morning. Naruto was in the middle of his usual training routine on the Black Bull's roof when the first explosions lit up the eastern districts. Not the controlled demolitions of construction work or the celebratory fireworks of some noble's party. These were the deep, resonant booms of combat magic deployed with lethal intent. He was moving before the sound finished echoing, leaping down through the base to wake his squadmates while shadow clones spread throughout the capital to assess the situation. What they found made his blood run cold. This wasn't a raid or a terrorist attack. This was an invasion. Everyone up, he shouted, pounding on doors as he ran through the corridors. Full assault on the capital, all hands, combat deployment. The Black Bulls responded with the chaotic efficiency that had become their trademark. Magna emerged from his room already wreathed in flame magic. Luck bounced past with manic excitement crackling around him like lightning, and Vanessa appeared fully dressed despite having been asleep seconds earlier. What's the situation? Yami demanded, appearing in the common room while still buttoning his shirt. Coordinated assault, multiple entry points, heavy magical artillery, Naruto reported, processing information from his scouting clones in real time. Eye of the Midnight Sun forces supported by what look like summoned creatures from another dimension. They're not trying to infiltrate, they're trying to level the place. Casualties rising fast. They hit the residential districts first, then moved toward the government buildings. Civilian evacuation is underway, but it's chaotic and they don't have enough Magic Knight escorts. Yami's expression darkened. Then we split up. Finral, get everyone to their assigned emergency positions. Naruto, you're with me on. Captain, Naruto interrupted, something in his tone making everyone pause. I need to handle civilian evacuation coordination. My clones can cover more ground than any other single Magic Knight, and if this is as big as my scouts are reporting. He paused, the weight of what he was suggesting settling over the room. He was asking to be separated from his squad, to take on massive responsibility while facing unknown enemies. People are going to die if the evacuation isn't properly organized, he continued. And I'm the only one here who can be in multiple places simultaneously. Yami studied him for a long moment, clearly recognizing the tactical logic while also understanding the personal risk involved. You sure about this, kid? I'm sure. Then go, but you stay in contact through the communication crystals, and if things get too hot, you retreat to a designated fallback position. No heroic last stands. Understood, Captain. But even as Naruto said it, he knew that if it came down to choosing between his own safety and protecting civilians, there was really no choice at all. The royal capital in the midst of a full-scale assault was unlike anything Naruto had experienced, even in his previous life. The enemy forces moved with precision that spoke of extensive planning and detailed intelligence about the city's layout and defenses. They'd positioned themselves to maximize chaos while minimizing organized resistance. But what made it truly terrifying was the creatures fighting alongside the human attackers. They looked like they'd been assembled from nightmares and mathematics, geometric shapes that moved with predatory intelligence, shadow beings that existed in 3 dimensions but cast reflections in 4, and worst of all, things that looked almost human but radiated wrongness that made people physically ill just by being near them. Naruto's shadow clones spread throughout the city like a living information network, coordinating evacuation routes, establishing safe zones, and providing tactical support to overwhelmed Magic Knight units. But it was exhausting work that pushed his abilities to their absolute limits. Clone number 47 reporting came the mental feedback from one of his duplicates. Eastern District evacuation route is compromised. Enemy forces have established a checkpoint that's preventing civilian escape. Clone 62 here reported another. Medical district is under heavy attack. They're specifically targeting the hospital. Clone 39. Northern residential area is being overrun. Request immediate support. The information flow was overwhelming, each clone's experiences adding to the growing tactical picture in his mind. The enemy wasn't just trying to conquer the capital, they were trying to break it, to turn it into such a symbol of devastation that resistance would collapse throughout the kingdom, which meant he couldn't just focus on evacuation. He had to actively engage enemy forces, disrupting their operations while simultaneously protecting civilians. It was exactly the kind of impossible multi-front battle he'd specialized in during his previous life. All clones shift to active defense pattern he commanded through their shared consciousness. Priority 1, protect civilian evacuation. Priority 2, disrupt enemy operations. Priority 3, gather intelligence about their command structure. What followed was urban warfare on a scale that would have been impossible for anyone without his unique abilities. Naruto fought on 17 different fronts simultaneously, his clones engaging enemy forces throughout the capital, while his original body coordinated the overall defense from a position that gave him clear oversight of the battlefield. At the eastern checkpoint, his clones used coordinated spiraling monospheres to punch through enemy barricades, creating an escape route for trapped families. In the medical district, they formed defensive perimeters that held off waves of interdimensional creatures while healers evacuated patients. Throughout the residential areas, they appeared wherever civilians were in immediate danger, fighting holding actions that bought time for people to reach safety. But the enemy had planned for resistance, and their response was swift and coordinated. Interesting, came a voice from behind him as he stood on the roof of the Magic Knight's headquarters, processing information from dozens of simultaneous engagements. So this is how you manage such extensive battlefield coordination. Naruto spun to find a figure in white robes standing on the opposite edge of the roof, not the masked operative from their previous encounter, but but someone who radiated even more power and malevolent intelligence. "Eye of the Midnight Sun," Naruto said, his hand moving instinctively toward his grimoire. "Let me guess, you're here for me specifically." "Oh, I'm here for much more than just you," the figure replied with amusement that sounded like breaking glass. "Though you are certainly part of the larger design." He gestured, and suddenly Naruto could feel it, a wrongness in the very fabric of reality around the capital, like someone had started pulling threads from the tapestry of existence itself. "Your reincarnation was quite convenient for us," the figure continued conversationally. "Do you have any idea what happens when a soul crosses between dimensional boundaries carrying power that doesn't belong in its new reality?" "Enlighten me," Naruto replied, though he was already starting to understand the implications with growing horror. "It creates fractures," the enemy said with satisfaction. "Tiny cracks in the barriers that separate different planes of existence. Most are too small to be useful, but when that soul belongs to someone with your particular history, well, the fractures become significantly more substantial." Naruto felt his stomach drop as the full scope of what he was being told hit him. His reincarnation hadn't just brought him to this world, it had weakened the boundaries that kept other things out. Every time you've used abilities from your previous life, every time you've channeled power that operates according to different rules than this reality's magic system, you've widened those fractures, the figure explained with academic detachment. "And now, finally, they're large enough for us to exploit properly." As if to demonstrate his point, tears began appearing in the air above the capital, not physical wounds, but gaps in reality itself through which things that definitely didn't belong in this world began pouring through. "Demons," Naruto breathed, recognizing the malevolent energy signatures even though the creatures themselves looked nothing like any demons he'd encountered in his previous life. "Demons, devils, negative spirits, entropy incarnate, the names change depending on which reality they originate from," the figure said dismissively. "What matters is that they're here, they're hungry, and they have you to thank for the doorway that let them in." The guilt hit Naruto like a physical blow. Every person who died today, every family destroyed by creatures from other dimensions, every child who would grow up in a world made darker by interdimensional predators, it was his fault. His presence in this world, his use of abilities that didn't belong here, had created the very fractures that made this invasion possible. "Now you understand," the figure said with satisfaction. "Your heroic efforts to protect people have actually doomed them. Your strength, drawn from another reality, has made their reality vulnerable to forces they have no hope of resisting." "Then I'll stop using those abilities," Naruto said desperately. "I'll find a way to seal the fractures too." "Too late," the figure interrupted. "The damage is already done. The fractures are self-sustaining now, and they'll continue to widen whether you use your otherworldly powers or not." In fact, his expression shifted to something that might have been anticipation. "The only way to seal them would be to remove their source entirely. To send your soul back where it came from, along with all the power it brought with it. You're talking about killing me. I'm talking about undoing a mistake that should never have been allowed to happen in the first place." The figure raised his hands, and dark energy began coiling around his fingers. Not magic from this world, but something that felt like it had been pulled from the same interdimensional spaces the demons were emerging from. The irony is quite delicious, don't you think? The great protector, whose very existence threatens everything he's trying to protect. The hero whose heroism is actually the source of the calamity he's fighting against. Naruto felt despair threatened to overwhelm him, but then something else rose up in response, not despair but rage. Rage at being manipulated, at having his desire to protect people twisted into a weapon against them, at facing an enemy who thought guilt and self-doubt were sufficient to paralyze him. "You know what I think," he said, golden energy beginning to flicker around his form as his connection to Kurama stirred in response to his emotional state. "I think you're making the same mistake every enemy I've ever faced has made. And what's that? You think guilt and responsibility are weaknesses." The golden energy flared brighter, and suddenly Naruto wasn't just a 15-year-old magic knight anymore. He was the embodiment of every lesson learned across 2 lifetimes of impossible battles. "But they're not weaknesses, they're the reason I refuse to give up no matter what the cost. Even when your very existence is what's causing the problem. Especially then." Naruto's voice carried absolute conviction. "If my presence in this world created the fractures, then my presence in this world can find a way to fix them. If my power is the source of the instability, then my power is what's going to stabilize it. And if you think I'm going to let guilt paralyze me while people are dying." He grinned, and there was something in the expression that made even the interdimensional entity take a step backward. Then you really don't understand who you're dealing with. The battle that followed was unlike anything the royal capital had ever witnessed. Not just because of the scale of power being thrown around, but because of the way reality itself seemed to bend and warp around the combatants. Naruto fought with everything he had: shadow clones that moved with tactical precision, spiraling mana spheres that punched holes through dimensional barriers, and most importantly, the growing understanding that his otherworldly abilities weren't separate from this world's magic system, but could be integrated with it. But even as he fought, he could feel it. Something vast and malevolent stirring in the spaces between dimensions, attracted by the conflict and the destabilized reality around the capital. Something that made the demons pouring through the fractures look like minor inconveniences. "Kit," came Kurama's voice in his mind, urgent in a way he'd never heard before. "Something's coming through. Something old and hungry and very, very powerful. The fractures aren't just letting demons in, they're attracting the attention of things that should never be allowed in any reality." "How bad?" Naruto asked silently, while simultaneously fighting off attacks from his immediate opponent. The kind of bad that could unravel not just this world, but the entire dimensional framework that keeps different realities from colliding with each other. The kind of bad that makes the Ten Tails look like a minor nuisance. As if summoned by Kurama's warning, the fractures above the capital suddenly widened dramatically, and something began pushing through from the other side. Not emerging, not yet, but testing the boundaries, feeling for weaknesses in the dimensional barriers. Whatever it was, its mere presence made reality itself start to unravel at the edges. "Do you feel that?" the robed figure asked with reverence that was genuinely disturbing. The attention of the Void Watchers, drawn by the instability your presence has created. They who exist in the spaces between realities, feeding on dimensional collapse and the death of entire universes. Naruto felt his blood turn to ice. He'd faced world-ending threats before, but this was something else entirely. This was the kind of enemy that could destroy not just a world, but the very concept of existence itself. "Congratulations," the figure continued with mad satisfaction. "Your heroic efforts have attracted the attention of entities that exist to unravel the fundamental structure of reality. Even if you win this battle, even if you drive back our forces and seal the immediate fractures, they know this dimension exists now. They'll be back, and when they come," he gestured at the widening tiers in space above them, "there will be no place to run, no place to hide, and no way to stop them from consuming everything that has ever existed or ever could exist." The words hit Naruto like a physical blow, not because of their immediate threat, but because of their long-term implications. His reincarnation, his very existence in this world, had not just endangered the people he cared about. It had potentially doomed every reality connected to this dimensional framework. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, another voice rose up in response. Not Kurama this time, but the memory of everyone who had ever believed in him. Everyone who had trusted him to find a way when no way seemed possible. "There's always a way," he thought with growing determination. "There's always something that can be done, some solution that hasn't been tried yet. I just need to be smart enough, strong enough, and stubborn enough to find it." And as he looked up at the writhing fractures in space, at the vast malevolent intelligence pressing against the barriers between realities, Naruto Uzumaki began to smile. It was the same smile he'd worn when facing the Ten Tails, when confronting Madara, when standing against impossible odds with nothing but determination and the absolute refusal to give up. "You know what?" he said to the robed figure, golden energy flaring around him like a second sun. "I've changed my mind about something." "About what?" "About whether this is my fault or not." Naruto's voice carried growing confidence. "You're right, my reincarnation created the fractures. My presence destabilized the barriers between realities. My power attracted the attention of things that should never be allowed to exist." He paused, his smile widening. "Which means I'm exactly the right person to fix it." The figure stared at him, clearly not understanding how someone could be so confident in the face of such overwhelming odds. "You can't fix this," he said with certainty. "No single individual, no matter how powerful, can repair damage to the fundamental structure of reality itself." "Maybe not," Naruto agreed, "but I don't have to do it alone." As if summoned by his words, portals began opening around the battlefield, not the chaotic tiers created by the enemy, but controlled spatial magic that brought reinforcements from across the kingdom. Yuno and the Golden Dawn, Asta and the rest of the Black Bulls, magic knights from every squad responding to the crisis. But more than that, Naruto could feel something else. A resonance from people across the capital, across the kingdom, people who were lending their strength to the fight not through magic or weapons, but through simple, stubborn refusal to surrender to despair. The will of fire burning not just in his chest, but in the hearts of everyone who refused to give up hope. "This world has something yours doesn't," Naruto said to the robed figure, golden energy now spreading outward to touch every magic knight on the battlefield. "It has people who will stand together when everything seems impossible. It has bonds that can't be broken by fear or despair. And it has me." He rose into the air, power flowing through him not just from his connection to Kurama, but from every person in the capital who was choosing courage over fear, hope over despair, unity over isolation. "So let's see which is stronger," he called out, his voice carrying across the entire battlefield. "Your ancient demons and reality-eating entities, or a bunch of stubborn humans who refuse to quit no matter what the odds." Above them, the fractures in space pulsed with malevolent energy, and something vast and hungry pressed against the barriers between worlds with increasing urgency. The final battle was about to begin, and for the first time since this nightmare had started, Naruto was actually looking forward to it. The thing trying to push through the dimensional fractures above the royal capital defied description in any language that existed in this reality. It wasn't just large. Size was a concept that applied to things that existed within the normal framework of space and time. This entity existed between frameworks, in the gaps where mathematical constants broke down and the laws of physics became suggestions rather than rules. But what made it truly terrifying wasn't its impossible geometry or reality-warping presence. It was the hunger radiating from it, not hunger for food or power or conquest, but hunger for existence itself. It wanted to consume the very concept of reality, to reduce everything that was or could be into the primordial void from which nothing could ever emerge. "Void Watcher," the robed figure said with reverence that bordered on madness. "Devourer of dimensions, unmaker of worlds. Your presence in this reality has called it here, and now..." His words were cut off as Naruto's spiraling mana sphere caught him in the chest, sending him flying across the rooftop. But even as the immediate enemy was dealt with, Naruto's attention remained focused on the cosmic horror pressing against the dimensional barriers above them. "Kit," came Kurama's urgent voice in his mind. "That thing isn't just trying to enter this reality, it's trying to collapse the entire dimensional framework. If it gets through, it won't just destroy this world. It'll create a cascade failure that unravels every reality connected to this one." "Including our original world?" Naruto asked silently while his body moved on autopilot, coordinating with the arriving magic knights. "Everything. Every world, every timeline, every possibility that ever existed or could exist. Complete ontological collapse. The scope of the threat was almost incomprehensible. Naruto had faced world-ending enemies before, but this was universe-ending, reality-ending. The kind of threat that made every previous crisis seem trivial by comparison. But as he watched his friends and allies taking positions around the battlefield, Asta with his anti-magic sword ready, Yuno with wind magic swirling around him like a small hurricane, dozens of magic knights preparing to face an enemy they couldn't possibly understand, Naruto felt something settle in his chest. Not despair or overwhelming responsibility. Peace. This was what he'd been reincarnated for, not to live a quiet second life or to slowly reveal his abilities over time. He'd been brought to this world because this moment required someone who understood what it meant to stand against impossible odds and refuse to surrender. "Everyone," he called out, his voice carrying across the battlefield with authority that made even veteran Magic Knight captains turn to listen. "New tactical priority, we're not just fighting the eye of the midnight sun anymore. We're fighting something that wants to erase the concept of existence itself." "What does that mean for us?" came Captain Fugolian's voice from across the battlefield. "It means we're going to do something that's never been attempted before," Naruto replied, golden energy beginning to flicker around his form as his connection to Kurama deepened. "We're going to coordinate every magic knight in the capital into a single unified technique powerful enough to seal dimensional fractures and send cosmic entities back where they came from." "That's impossible," someone called out. "The mana requirements alone would kill everyone involved." "Not if we do it right," Naruto said, his confidence carrying across the battlefield like a physical force. "And not if everyone trusts me enough to follow my coordination without question." He rose higher into the air, golden energy now visible to everyone as it spread outward from his body like liquid sunlight. But this wasn't the chaotic explosion of power from his earlier incidents. This was controlled, purposeful, and most importantly, it was reaching out to every magic knight on the battlefield. 9 paths resonance, he said, his voice somehow audible to everyone despite the chaos around them. Complete chakra enhancement for all allied forces. What happened next would be talked about for generations. Every magic knight in the royal capital suddenly found themselves operating at levels of power and coordination they'd never imagined possible. Fire magic burned with the intensity of miniature suns, wind techniques achieved precision that could cut between raindrops, water attacks moved with the force of tsunamis contained in teacup-sized spaces. But more than raw power, they found themselves thinking with tactical brilliance that seemed to come from outside their own minds. Combat instincts honed across countless battles, strategic understanding that encompassed entire battlefields, and most importantly, absolute certainty that they were part of something larger than themselves. For the first time in the history of the Clover Kingdom, every magic knight in the capital was fighting not as individuals, but as extensions of a single tactical intelligence. Naruto's voice cut through the enhanced coordination network. Anti-magic slash at grid reference 77 alpha, cut the anchor points holding that fracture open. On it, Asta replied, his sword now wreathed in energy that made it even more effective against magical constructs. Wind barrier at maximum altitude. We need to contain the dimensional bleed-through while we work on the primary fractures. Already in position, called back, his wind magic now carrying harmonics that actually strengthened the fabric of spacetime rather than just moving air around. All fire magic users, concentrated thermal lance at the following coordinates. Naruto rattled off a series of positions that would force the Void Watcher to withdraw its probing tendrils from their reality. The coordinated assault was unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed. Hundreds of magic knights working in perfect harmony, their individual techniques combining into attacks that operated on levels of power and precision that shouldn't have been achievable by human magic. And at the center of it all, Naruto floated in a sphere of golden energy that pulsed with each heartbeat, each breath, each moment of shared determination that flowed between him and the people he was protecting. But even as the assault forced the cosmic entity to withdraw temporarily, Naruto could feel the strain building in his own magical channels. Enhancing every magic knight in the capital with chakra-based power amplification was pushing him beyond his absolute limits. His mana reserves were dropping toward critical levels, and the golden energy around him was beginning to flicker. Kit Kurama's voice carried urgent warning. You can't maintain this much longer. The power drain is going to kill you. How long do we need to seal the fractures permanently? Naruto asked silently. With this level of coordinated power, maybe another 10 minutes. But you'll be dead in 5 if you keep pushing this hard. Then we need a different approach. Everyone, Naruto called out, his voice now carrying strain that was audible to all the enhanced magic knights. The coordination enhancement is unsustainable at current levels. I'm going to have to reduce power distribution in 60 seconds. What does that mean? Came Noel's voice from somewhere in the chaotic battlefield. It means we need to end this now, or we lose our window of opportunity. But even as he spoke, Naruto was studying the dimensional fractures with enhanced senses that revealed their true structure. The cracks in reality weren't random, they formed a pattern, a geometric design that channeled dimensional instability in specific ways. And suddenly, he understood. The fractures could be sealed, but not by force. They needed to be rewoven, like repairing a tapestry by carefully threading new material through the damaged areas. It would require incredible precision, perfect timing, and more power than any single individual could provide. But it could be done. New plan, he announced. I'm going to attempt direct dimensional manipulation to rewove the fracture pattern, but I'll need every magic knight to channel their power through me at the exact moment I begin the technique. No holding back, no reserving strength for defense, everything we have all at once. That will kill you, came Julius's voice through the communication network. Maybe, Naruto replied honestly. But if we don't try it, the alternative is universal extinction. There has to be another way, Asta started to say. No, Naruto interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of hard decisions made in desperate circumstances. Sometimes there isn't another way. Sometimes someone has to pay the price so everyone else can live. But even as he prepared to begin what would almost certainly be a suicide technique, 2 other voices cut through the communication network. Like hell you're doing this alone, came Asta's declaration, his anti-magic sword now glowing with energy that shouldn't have been possible. We started this journey together, Yuno added, his wind magic beginning to resonate with frequencies that matched Naruto's chakra enhancement. "We're ending it together too." Before Naruto could protest, both his oldest friends rose into the air beside him, their magical signatures beginning to synchronize with his own in ways that defied every known theory about power combination. "Asta, your anti-magic can't help with dimensional manipulation." "Says who?" Asta grinned, his sword now crackling with energy that seemed to exist in the spaces between magical categories. "Maybe anti-magic is exactly what we need to cut through the barriers between realities." "And wind magic," Yuno added, his control now operating at levels that made his earlier techniques look like party tricks, "can carry more than just air. It can carry intention, will, the combined determination of everyone fighting alongside us." As they spoke, something impossible began to happen. Instead of Naruto channeling power to them, all three began channeling power to each other. Not Naruto leading and others following, but true collaboration between equals who understood each other perfectly. "Trinity resonance," Naruto breathed, recognizing what was happening even though it should have been impossible. "Chakra enhancement, anti-magic amplification, and wind magic coordination, all synchronized into a single unified technique." "Is that what we're calling it?" Asta laughed, his usual cheerfulness now backed by power that could reshape reality. "I like it, whatever we call it," Yuno said with satisfaction. "It's working, look." The dimensional fractures above them had stopped expanding. More than that, they were beginning to contract as the trinity of coordinated power began reweaving the damaged fabric of spacetime. But the Void Watcher wasn't giving up easily. Sensing that its opportunity to enter this reality was slipping away, it pressed against the barriers with renewed desperation, its alien hunger manifesting as attacks that targeted not just their bodies, but the very concept of their existence. "It's trying to unmake us," Naruto realized with growing alarm. "Not kill us, erase us from ever having existed in the first place." "Then we better finish this fast," Asta replied, his anti-magic now cutting through ontological attacks like they were physical objects. "Agreed," Yuno said, his wind magic carrying the combined will of every person in the capital who refused to surrender to cosmic horror. "Everyone ready?" "Ready," Naruto confirmed, feeling the power of every magic knight in the capital flowing through their Trinity connection. What followed was the single most complex magical technique ever attempted in the history of the Clover Kingdom. Naruto's chakra enhancement provided the raw power and tactical coordination needed to manipulate dimensional structures. Asta's anti-magic cut through the barriers that would normally prevent such manipulation, creating temporary gaps where new patterns could be woven. Yuno's wind magic carried the intentions and will of everyone fighting alongside them, ensuring that the new patterns would be stable and permanent. And all around them, every magic knight in the capital channeled their power through the Trinity connection, providing the sustained energy needed to rewrite reality itself. The technique required perfect precision. One mistake, and they would tear open fractures that made the current crisis look trivial. It required perfect timing. Too fast and the new patterns wouldn't set properly. Too slow and the Void Watcher would break through before they could finish. And most of all, it required perfect trust. Trust that each member of the Trinity would play their part flawlessly. Trust that the other magic knights would provide power without trying to control how it was used. Trust that the technique would work despite being theoretically impossible. For 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours, 3 boys from a tiny village in the Forsaken Realm rewrote the fundamental structure of reality, while cosmic entities pressed against the barriers of existence itself. When it was finally over, when the last fracture had been sealed, and the Void Watcher had been banished back to whatever spaces between realities it had emerged from, the 3 of them collapsed onto the rooftop in a tangle of exhausted limbs and drained magical reserves. "Did we do it?" Asta asked weakly, his anti-magic sword finally extinguished. "We did it," Naruto confirmed, feeling the stable patterns they'd woven settling into permanent harmony with this reality's natural structure. "Good," Yuno said with satisfaction, "because I don't think I could do that again if my life depended on it." Around them, the other magic knights were collapsing as well, their enhanced abilities fading as the chakra augmentation network dissolved. But they were all alive, the capital was intact, and most importantly, the dimensional barriers were stronger now than they had been before the crisis began. "Trinity resonance," Julius said wonderingly as he approached their exhausted forms. "I've never seen magical collaboration on that scale before. The theoretical implications alone. Could we maybe discuss the theoretical implications after we've had some sleep?" Naruto asked weakly. "And maybe some food." Rewriting reality is exhausting work. Of course, Julius replied with his usual cheerful demeanor, though there was deep respect in his eyes as he looked at the three young men who had just prevented universal extinction. I think you've earned whatever rest you need. As medical personnel arrived to check on their condition and other magic knights began the process of cleaning up after the battle, Naruto found himself thinking about what they'd accomplished. Not just the dimensional repair work, though that had been unprecedented. Not just the defeat of the Eye of the Midnight Sun's invasion, though that had been crucial. But the demonstration that some problems were too big for any individual to solve alone, no matter how powerful they might be. The Will of Fire had always been about more than personal strength. It was about the bonds between people, the willingness to support each other when everything seemed impossible, the understanding that together they could accomplish things that none of them could achieve individually. Today, that principle had literally saved reality itself. "Hey, Naruto," Asta said quietly as they were helped to their feet. "What happens now? I mean, we just prevented the end of existence. Kind of hard to top that." "Now we go home," Naruto replied with a tired smile. "We rest, we recover, and we remember that saving the world is just the beginning. The real work starts tomorrow when we have to figure out how to build something better in the world we've protected." "Sounds good to me," Yuno said with rare warmth in his voice. "As long as we do it together." "Together," Naruto agreed, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. Always together. As they walked through the recovering capital, past crowds of people who were alive because 3 kids from nowhere had refused to give up, Naruto felt something he hadn't experienced since his reincarnation, complete peace with who he was and where he belonged. He was Naruto Uzumaki, reincarnated Hokage and Black Bull Magic Knight. He was someone who carried power from another world and used it to protect this one. He was part of a Trinity that could reshape reality when necessary, and part of a larger family that would always be there to catch him when he fell. The Will of Fire burned bright in his chest, no longer a burden carried alone, but a flame shared with everyone whose life he'd touched. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to protect the people he cared about. But tonight, he was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by the family he'd chosen and the world he'd helped to save. Some stories ended with grand gestures and dramatic sacrifices. This one ended with 3 friends walking home together, tired but triumphant, ready to face whatever came next as long as they faced it as a team. It was exactly the ending the Will of Fire deserved. 3 months after the dimensional crisis, Naruto stood in the same practice yard where he'd first demonstrated his shadow clone magic to his Black Bull's squadmates. But something fundamental had changed. The golden energy that had once flickered around him during moments of extreme emotional stress was gone, not suppressed or hidden, completely absent. In its place was something new, something that belonged entirely to this world while still carrying echoes of who he'd been before. "Shadow magic, multi-dimensional formation," he said quietly, watching as his clones materialized around the training ground. They looked the same as always, but their magical signature was different now. Purely Black Clover magic, operating according to this world's rules and powered by mana that had been fundamentally altered by his experiences with dimensional manipulation. The reincarnated soul and the local reality had finally achieved complete integration. "Still weird seeing you do that," Asta commented from his position on the fence, though his tone carried more wonder than confusion these days. "What's weird about it? It's like watching someone speak 2 languages at the same time," Yuno observed, appearing beside them with his usual silent grace. "The techniques are purely from this world now, but the way you use them. There's still something else there, something that makes them uniquely yours." Naruto dismissed his clones and considered Yuno's observation. His friend was right, the power source had changed, but the tactical thinking, the strategic coordination, the understanding of how to use abilities in ways that maximized protection for others while minimizing risk to allies, that all remained. "Maybe that's what integration actually looks like," he said finally. "Not losing who you were, but finding a way to be who you were and who you're becoming at the same time." "Deep thoughts for a Tuesday morning," came Yami's voice as the captain approached across the practice yard. "You ready for this?" Naruto looked down at the Black Bull's robe in his hands, not his usual squad member uniform, but something new. The same design, but with additional insignia that marked him as vice captain of the Black Bull squad. "Still not sure I've earned it," he said honestly. "Kid, you coordinated the defense of the entire royal capital, prevented universal extinction, and somehow managed to turn our collection of misfits into the most tactically effective squad in the kingdom," Yami replied with amusement. If that doesn't earn you a promotion, nothing will. The ceremony itself was surprisingly low-key. No grand pronouncements or elaborate rituals, just Julius formally recognizing what everyone already knew, that Naruto had grown into a leader whose tactical brilliance and unwavering commitment to protecting others made him invaluable to the Magic Knights as a whole. Vice Captain Naruto Uzumaki, Julius said with his characteristic smile, your first official assignment is to continue doing exactly what you've been doing. Coordinate inter-squad training exercises, provide tactical consultation for complex missions, and most importantly, keep finding new ways to help people work together effectively. Understood, Wizard King. But as the formal ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Julius caught his arm. There's something else, the older man said quietly. A personal project I'd like to discuss with you, something that could have long-term benefits for the entire kingdom. The proposal Julius outlined was ambitious in scope and personal in motivation. An academy, he explained as they walked through the royal capital's administrative district. Not just for magical training, but for tactical coordination, leadership development, and most importantly, for teaching people from different backgrounds to work together effectively. You want me to run a school? I want you to create something that doesn't exist yet, Julius corrected. A place where noble children and commoners train side by side, where different types of magic are treated as equally valuable, where the focus is on how individual abilities can be combined for maximum effectiveness rather than on raw power or social status. Naruto felt something stir in his chest, not the familiar fire of determination, but something warmer and more hopeful. The Will of Fire Academy. Is that what you'd call it? It's what it would represent, Naruto said, his mind already racing with possibilities. The idea that everyone has something valuable to contribute, that strength comes from unity rather than individual superiority, that the bonds between people are more important than the power any one person possesses. Julius's smile widened. I take it you're interested, very interested. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning sessions, site selection, and curriculum development. But what impressed everyone involved wasn't just Naruto's educational vision, it was his insistence that the academy be a collaborative effort from the very beginning. I want instructors from every Magic Knight squad, he explained to the planning committee. Not just the prestigious ones. If we're teaching people that all abilities have value, then our faculty needs to reflect that principle. What about academic subjects? Asked one of the educational consultants Julius had brought in. Integrated with practical training, Naruto replied immediately. History classes that focus on tactical analysis of past battles, mathematics taught through magical energy calculations, literature studies that examine different perspectives on conflict resolution. Everything connected, everything relevant to the real challenges our students will face. And the social integration component, Naruto's expression grew more serious. Mixed housing from day one. Noble and commoner students sharing dormitories, eating in the same dining halls, participating in the same training exercises. No special privileges based on family background or magical power level. Everyone succeeds or fails based on their own efforts and how well they work with their teammates. The scope of what he was proposing was unprecedented in the Clover Kingdom's history. Not just a school, but a fundamental challenge to the social structures that had governed their society for centuries. It's ambitious, Julius observed. Some people are going to resist the idea pretty strongly. Good, Naruto replied with satisfaction. If we're not making some people uncomfortable, we're probably not changing enough. The groundbreaking ceremony for the Will of Fire Academy took place on a crisp autumn morning, with representatives from across the kingdom in attendance. But as Naruto looked out at the assembled crowd, nobles and commoners, Magic Knight captains and village representatives, students who would be part of the academy's first class, he felt a familiar tightness in his throat. Nervous? Asta asked, appearing beside him with his usual boundless energy. Excited, Naruto corrected. This feels like the beginning of something important. Speeches usually do, Yuno observed dryly, though there was warmth in his golden eyes. Try not to ramble too much about teamwork and bonds between people. We've heard that particular lecture before. Have you now? Naruto grinned. Well, in that case, I'll try to come up with some new material. But when he stepped up to the podium and looked out at the crowd, the words that came weren't new at all. They were as old as his first life, as familiar as breathing, as true in this world as they had been in the last. The Will of Fire isn't about magical power or social status or individual achievement, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled audience. It's about the understanding that we're all part of something larger than ourselves. It's about the recognition that our strength comes not from what we can do alone, but from what we can accomplish together. He paused, his eyes finding familiar faces in the crowd, his Black Bulls squadmates, his fellow Magic Knight captains, the friends who had stood with him against impossible odds and helped him find his place in this world. This academy exists because someone once taught me that the bonds between people are the most powerful magic of all, he continued. Because someone showed me that true strength comes from protecting others, not from dominating them. Because someone demonstrated that the greatest victories are won not by individual heroes, but by ordinary people who refuse to give up on each other. The ceremony concluded with the ritual lighting of a flame that would burn permanently at the Academy's heart, not magical fire, but simple combustion that would require constant tending and care to maintain. A reminder that some things couldn't be sustained through power alone, but required daily attention and commitment from everyone involved. As the crowd began to disperse and planning for the Academy's opening semester began in earnest, Naruto found himself surrounded by the people who had shaped his journey in this world. So, Vanessa said with her characteristic smile, from dead last Academy student to Academy founder, that's quite a progression. Just following the pattern, Naruto replied with amusement. Fail at the conventional approach, then create your own approach that works better for everyone involved. Very philosophical, Magna observed. Next you'll be writing books about leadership theory. Don't give him ideas, Luck laughed. He's already got enough projects to keep him busy for the next decade. But even as he bantered with his squadmates, Naruto's attention kept drifting to the flame now burning at the Academy's center. It looked so small compared to the massive construction project around it, so vulnerable compared to the political and social changes it represented. Yet it would outlast all of them, he knew. Long after the current generation of Magic Knights had retired, long after the current social structures had evolved into something unrecognizable, that flame would still be burning. A reminder that some principles were worth preserving across generations. That evening, as the celebration wound down and people began making their way home, Naruto found himself drawn to the same rooftop where he'd spent so many nights talking with Asta and Yuno about their dreams and ambitions. His friends were already there, of course, sitting in the same positions they'd occupied as children in Hage Village, looking up at the same stars that had witnessed their journey from powerless kids to heroes of the kingdom. Feels different now, Asta said quietly, his usual exuberance replaced by contemplative calm. Like we actually became who we said we were going to become. Did we? Yuno asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I mean, are you really the wizard king you imagined being when we were kids? Not exactly, Asta replied with a smile. Turns out being the wizard king isn't about having the most power or winning the most fights. It's about inspiring other people to be their best selves, about creating opportunities for everyone to contribute something meaningful. And you? Naruto asked, looking at Yuno. Are you the elite magic knight you plan to become? I'm something better, Yuno said with rare emotional openness. I'm part of a team that can accomplish things none of us could manage individually. I'm someone who understands that excellence isn't about being superior to others, it's about helping everyone around you reach their full potential. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them to this point. Finally, Asta spoke again. What about you, Naruto? Are you who you wanted to be? The question was more complex than either of his friends realized. How could he explain that he'd already been who he wanted to be once before, in another life, in another world? How could he describe the strange experience of achieving the same essential goal twice, using different methods but driven by the same fundamental values? I'm who I needed to be, he said finally. Someone who could protect this world, these people, this life we've built together. Someone who could carry the best parts of who I was before into who I'm becoming now. That's a very diplomatic answer, Yuno observed with amusement. It's an honest answer, Naruto corrected. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, surrounded by exactly the people I'm supposed to be surrounded by. Even if those people include Luck's manic battle obsession and Magna's tendency to set things on fire, Asta asked with a grin. Especially then, Naruto replied warmly. Perfect people don't need families, imperfect people do, and we've got the most wonderfully imperfect family anyone could ask for. As the night grew deeper and the stars wheeled overhead, their conversation gradually faded into comfortable silence. But it wasn't the silence of having nothing left to say, it was the silence of people who knew each other well enough that words weren't always necessary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The academy would need to be staffed and supplied, curriculum would need to be finalized, social resistance would need to be addressed. There would be missions and crises, and all the complex responsibilities that came with leadership positions in an organization dedicated to protecting others. But tonight, three friends sat together under the same stars that had watched over their childhood, confident in their bonds and optimistic about their future. Tonight, the will of fire burned bright in all their hearts, no longer just a personal flame, but a shared illumination that would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. "You know what I realized?" Naruto said eventually, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the still air. "What?" both his friends asked simultaneously, then grinned at their synchronization. "I used to think that being strong meant being able to protect everyone by yourself, but actually, being strong means building a world where everyone can protect each other." "Is that what we're doing with the academy?" Asta asked. "Building a world where everyone can protect each other. That's what we're trying to do," Naruto confirmed. "Create a place where people learn that differences in background or ability aren't obstacles to overcome, but resources to combine. Where strength is measured not by individual power, but by how effectively you can work with others. A world where the will of fire spreads from person to person instead of being concentrated in any single individual," Yuno added thoughtfully. "Exactly." They remained on the rooftop until the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, talking about their plans for the future and their memories of the past, about the bonds that had sustained them through impossible challenges and the dreams that continued to drive them forward. When they finally climbed down from the roof and prepared to return to their respective responsibilities, Naruto paused at the door leading back into the building. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice carrying emotions too complex for simple words. "For what?" Asta asked, though his expression suggested he understood more than his question implied. "For accepting me," Naruto replied. "For letting me be part of your story, for trusting me with your friendship, for helping me become who I needed to be in this world." "Same to you," Yuno said simply. "We all became better because we became friends with you." "We all became better because we became friends with each other," Naruto corrected. "That's how it's supposed to work." As they parted ways to face the responsibilities of their new lives, Asta to his duties as a magic knight captain, Yuno to his responsibilities in the Golden Dawn, Naruto to his role as vice captain and academy founder, each carried with them the warmth of bonds that had been tested by cosmic-level threats and emerged stronger than ever. The will of fire burned bright in the heart of the Clover Kingdom, no longer a foreign concept brought from another world, but a native flame that belonged to everyone who chose to tend it. And in the academy that would soon bear its name, new generations of magic knights would learn that true strength came not from individual power, but from the bonds that connected them to each other. Some stories ended with grand battles and dramatic sacrifices. This one ended with three friends walking into the dawn of a new day, ready to build something better in the world they had fought to protect, confident in their bonds and optimistic about their future. The will of fire had found its home at last. And in that home, it would burn for generations yet to come, lighting the way for everyone who believed that together they could accomplish anything. Years later, when historians wrote about the dimensional crisis and its aftermath, they would focus on the tactical brilliance of the Trinity resonance technique, the unprecedented cooperation between Magic Knight squads, and the revolutionary changes that the Will of Fire Academy brought to Clover Kingdom society. But the people who lived through those changes knew the real truth, that the most important battles were won not with magic or strategy, but with the simple decision to never give up on the people who mattered to you. And in a small village that had once been called Hage, a statue stood in the town square depicting three children looking up at the stars, their expressions full of hope and determination. The inscription at its base was simple: "Together we can accomplish anything." It was a lesson worth remembering, it was a flame worth tending, it was the will of fire, burning bright in a world that had learned to call it home. The end. From Dead Last to Hokage to Academy Founder, honestly, Naruto's character arc never gets old. Watching him build a family with the Black Bulls while carrying the weight of 2 lifetimes, that's the good stuff right there. What hit you hardest? That Trinity Resonance finale, or maybe when he finally opened up to Yuno? Let me know below. Subscribe for more crossover madness, and seriously, drop your wildest what-if ideas in the comments. Y'all have some crazy good suggestions. Catch you in the next one. Stay awesome.